Imagine a universe where Rick Sanchez never turned to science to solve his existential crisis. In this corner of the multiverse, we find a Rick who's traded test tubes for meditation beads and portal guns for pruning shears. The Zen Garden universe presents us with a completely different side of the smartest man in the multiverse. One who's found that true intelligence lies not in controlling reality, but in accepting it exactly as it is. When we first enter this peaceful dimension, morning light filters through rice paper screens, casting gentle shadows across the tatami floor of Rick's modest dwelling. Gone is the cluttered garage workshop we're familiar with. Instead, Rick has transformed his space into a meticulously maintained Japanese Zen garden. The camera pans slowly across raked sand patterns that swirl and flow like the cosmos itself, creating a hypnotic visual that immediately begins to quiet the mind. This Rick rises before dawn each day, moving with a deliberate grace that would be unrecognizable to fans of his more frenetic counterpart. His hair, still wild and spiky, has gone completely white, and instead of his signature lab coat, he wears loose-fitting meditation robes in muted tones of blue and green. His movements lack the jerky, erratic quality we're used to seeing. There's no frantic gesturing or sudden outbursts. Instead, Zen Rick glides through his morning ritual with the practiced ease of someone who has found genuine inner peace. The garden itself is a marvel of tranquil design. Alien birds with iridescent feathers perch on carefully placed rocks, their soft chirping creating a natural soundtrack that's punctuated only by the gentle scrape of Rick's rake through the sand. These aren't your typical birds. Their plumage shifts color with the changing light, creating subtle waves of purple and blue that reflect on the sand below. Yet unlike the dangerous, often aggressive alien creatures we're used to seeing in the main universe, these beings coexist peacefully with Rick, sometimes landing on his shoulder as he works. What makes this universe particularly suitable for our sleep compilation is the exceptional attention to sensory detail. We observe Rick as he brews his morning tea, a ritual he performs with the same precision he once applied to scientific experiments. The herbs he uses aren't from Earth. They're gathered from specific dimensions known for their calming properties. As he steeps them in a handcrafted ceramic pot, they release a soft luminescence, glowing with gentle pulses that match the rhythm of deep, restful breathing. The camera movement in this universe deserves special mention. Unlike the quick cuts and dynamic angles of the main series, here the camera drifts slowly, often lingering on small details. The way light plays through leaves, the perfect symmetry of a freshly raked pattern, the steam rising from Rick's tea. This deliberate pacing creates a viewing experience that naturally slows the heart rate and calms the mind, perfect for those struggling to disconnect from the day's stresses. Zen Rick tends to a collection of bonsai-like alien plants that seem to respond to his touch. As his fingers brush their unusual foliage, the plants subtly shift and lean toward him, not in the menacing way of typical Rick and Morty flora, but with what appears to be genuine affection. These aren't the kinds of plants that might suddenly reveal teeth or tentacles. Their alien nature manifests in the way they gently glow or change color as they're tended to, creating a visual experience that's fascinating without being stimulating. Perhaps the most striking difference in this universe is Rick himself. When he speaks, gone is the abrasive, belching delivery we've come to expect. Instead, Zen Rick's voice emerges as a gentle whisper, often so soft that viewers might find themselves naturally leaning in to listen, only to be drawn deeper into relaxation. His observations aren't about the pointlessness of existence or the superiority of his intellect. Instead, he offers simple yet profound insights about acceptance and presence. The multiverse doesn't need our understanding to exist, he might murmur, while pruning a crystalline shrub. Our need to understand is just another attachment to release. These philosophical musings are delivered without the cynicism of Prime Rick, creating a soundtrack of gentle wisdom that lulls rather than challenges the listener. The color palette of this universe has been specifically designed with sleep science in mind. The predominant colors, soft blues, lavenders, and forest greens, are the very spectrum that research has shown to promote relaxation and improved sleep quality. Even the lighting seems designed for rest, with the harsh fluorescence of Rick's usual lab replaced by the natural glow of sunrise gradually transitioning to the golden warmth of afternoon. and finally, to the cool blues of twilight. In this peaceful dimension, we also witness a transformed relationship between Rick and Morty. Gone is the manipulation, the belittling, the using of Morty as a human shield or experimental subject. Instead, we observe a relationship built on mutual respect and quiet companionship. This Morty isn't anxious or constantly second-guessing himself. He moves with a confidence born not from bravado, but from genuine self-acceptance, clearly having learned from his grandfather's example. We see them working together in the garden, not speaking for long stretches, comfortable in the shared silence. When Morty does make a mistake, perhaps disturbing a carefully raked pattern or overwatering a sensitive plant, Rick doesn't respond with mockery or angry outbursts. Instead, he simply places a hand on Morty's shoulder and demonstrates the correct technique again, exhibiting the infinite patience of a true teacher. During evening meditation sessions, Rick and Morty sit facing the garden as the sun sets, their breathing synchronized, their usually chaotic energy completely at peace. The familiar silhouettes of their hair and profiles are still recognizable, creating a visual anchor to the characters we know, even as their behavior diverges dramatically from what we're used to seeing. This familiar yet different quality creates a strangely comforting viewing experience. For viewers familiar with the main series, this universe offers a fascinating contrast that highlights just how different Rick could have been had he channeled his genius in another direction. All the intelligence remains, but it's turned inward for understanding rather than outward for conquest and adventure. The result is a viewing experience that's both intellectually interesting and physically relaxing, the perfect combination for drifting off to sleep. From the meditative stillness of Zen Rick, we shift to a universe where slowness isn't a choice but the fundamental nature of reality. In the slow-motion dimension, time itself has stretched like taffy, creating a world where every second expands to 10. Here, the frenetic energy of Rick and Morty transforms into something entirely new. A hypnotic visual poem where familiar chaos unfolds with dreamlike grace. Imagine a universe where Rick raises a beaker of fluorescent liquid, and we actually see each bubble form, expand, and pop in exquisite detail. His trademark burp becomes a long, rumbling bass note that vibrates through the air like distant thunder. This Rick doesn't choose to slow down. The universe itself demands it, forcing even his brilliant mind to adapt to a reality where patience isn't a virtue but a necessity. In this dimension, breakfast becomes an epic journey. We watch as maple syrup pours from a bottle, creating amber rivers that cascade down a stack of pancakes with glacial deliberation. Morty's nervous energy, usually expressed through quick movements and anxious gestures, transforms into a beautiful underwater ballet. His typical eye darting becomes a mesmerizing dance as his pupils drift from one point of focus to another, revealing the subtle muscular adjustments that we never notice at normal speed. What makes this universe particularly fascinating is its soundscape. Every familiar noise from the show, portal guns firing, spacecraft engines humming, even the simple sounds of footsteps, stretches into something almost unrecognizable yet oddly musical. The pitch-down audio creates frequencies that resonate differently with our brains, producing an almost physical sensation of calm. High-pitched sounds that might normally trigger alertness are transformed into soothing bass tones that you feel more than hear. This audio transformation serves a unique purpose for viewers seeking sleep. The deep, drawn-out sounds create a form of auditory meditation, similar to the effect of certain sound healing practices. Rick's normally rapid-fire dialogue becomes a slow, rumbling monologue that washes over you like waves on a beach. The brain processes these stretched sounds differently, potentially inducing the same relaxed state we experience when drifting towards sleep. This Rick's lab experiments reveal themselves as works of art when slowed down. A chemical reaction that might appear as a simple color change in the regular universe becomes a mesmerizing dance of molecules. We see the moment two liquids meet, not as an instant transformation, but as a boundary where colors swirl and blend, creating fractal patterns that ripple outward with mathematical precision. The camera lingers on these reactions, allowing us to appreciate the beautiful complexity that exists in even the simplest scientific demonstrations. What's particularly interesting about this Rick is how he's adapted to his slow-motion existence. While our familiar Rick is defined by his impatience and constant motion, slow-motion Rick has developed a perspective that borders on enlightenment. He's learned to find beauty in waiting, to appreciate the journey rather than rushing toward results. We see this as he meticulously assembles a device, each component placed with perfect precision, his face showing not frustration at the time it takes but satisfaction in the process itself. Morty, too, has adapted to this reality. His anxiety, which normally manifests as quick, nervous movements, has transformed into something more contemplative. We watch as his expression shifts from confusion to understanding over the course of several minutes rather than seconds. This slowed emotional processing creates a strange empathy in viewers. We're given time to fully register and connect with what he's feeling, creating a deeper emotional resonance than typically possible. The animation itself reveals hidden treasures when played at this reduced speed. Background details that would normally flash by unnoticed become central to the viewing experience. We discover the meticulous work of the show's artists, tiny jokes written on distant signs, subtle expressions on background characters, and the careful construction of alien environments. The slow-motion effect creates a meditative viewing experience, allowing us to notice these details and appreciate the craftsmanship behind the animation. Even moments of potential danger in this universe are transformed. An explosion that would normally be a jarring, split-second event unfolds like a blooming flower, with flames extending outward in graceful tendrils that dance and curl in the air. What would be a tense action sequence in the normal show becomes a ballet of cause and effect, with each movement and consequence unfolding with beautiful inevitability. The relationship between Rick and Morty takes on new dimensions in this slowed reality. Their interactions, stripped of quick banter and sudden movements, reveal the underlying emotional currents that flow between them. A glance that might last a fraction of a second in the normal universe extends long enough for us to see the complex mix of frustration, affection, and understanding that defines their bond. This slow-motion effect reveals the subtle facial expressions that communicate more than dialogue ever could. The unique nature of this universe creates a viewing experience that's perfectly suited for the transition to sleep. The slow pace naturally lowers your heart rate and breathing, mirroring the physiological changes that occur as you drift off. The predictable, gradual nature of movement eliminates sudden stimuli that might jolt you back to alertness. Even if you're not trying to sleep, there's something oddly satisfying about watching familiar characters navigate a world where everything unfolds with deliberate grace. What makes this slow-motion universe particularly effective for relaxation is how it transforms the typically chaotic energy of Rick and Morty. The show's normal pace, with its quick cuts, rapid dialogue, and frenetic action, becomes something hypnotic and soothing. It's like watching waves roll onto a beach or clouds drift across the sky. There's movement and change, but it occurs at a pace that allows your mind to settle and your thoughts to slow. Time itself becomes something to contemplate in this universe. As viewers, we're used to animation being a medium of efficiency, showing only what's necessary to move the story forward. The slow-motion dimension invites us to experience time differently, to find value in moments that would normally be compressed or eliminated. A character simply walking across a room becomes a study in physics and movement. The arc of a thrown object becomes a lesson in gravity and momentum. These ordinary movements, slowed down, reveal their extraordinary nature. The ordinary movements of the slow-motion dimension lead us to a universe where nothing is ordinary at all, a place where Rick has discovered that the barrier between science and magic is merely an illusion of perspective. In this realm, scientific equations and mystical symbols aren't competing languages, but complementary dialects describing the same fundamental truths. The boundary that most Ricks maintain between measurable phenomena and metaphysical concepts has completely dissolved here, revealing a cognitive landscape where opposites don't just attract, they merge. Welcome to the science-magic fusion realm, where Rick wears both a lab coat and ceremonial robes simultaneously. Not as separate garments, but as a single piece of clothing that shifts between states depending on the angle from which you observe it. His workshop defies conventional categorization, with bubbling potions that float mid-air. suspended by forces that could be explained equally well through quantum levitation or ancient levitation spells. Next to a quantum computer calculating probabilities across infinite dimensions sits an ancient grimoire whose symbols rearrange themselves into the same equations displayed on the digital screen. The lighting in this space creates an atmosphere perfectly calibrated for deep relaxation. Bioluminescent crystals pulse with a rhythm exactly matching the human heart at rest, 60 beats per minute, their soft glow revealing ancient scrolls unfurling beside holographic displays. The shadows cast by these gentle light sources don't simply darken spaces but actively dance across surfaces, creating patterns that simultaneously resemble mathematical fractals and sacred mandalas. These living shadows seem to whisper mathematical formulas that sound strangely like incantations when heard from certain angles. This Rick's morning ritual begins with calculations that would seem bizarre to other Ricks across the multiverse. As he determines the coordinates for potential dimension jumps, his fingers move simultaneously across a holographic keyboard and an ancient star chart, consulting both quantum probability fields and mystical alignments with equal seriousness. The path between dimensions, he explains in a voice that resonates at a frequency designed to calm the nervous system, is both a mathematical solution and a spiritual journey. The equations tell us how to open the door, but the mystical traditions teach us why we might want to walk through it. When this Rick speaks, his words form both sound waves and visible symbols that hover briefly in the air. Koans that challenge the mind to transcend ordinary thinking. Consider the paradox of Schrödinger's cat, he tells his apprentice Morty while mixing a potion that changes color in response to his words. The universe doesn't collapse possibilities until observation occurs. Is this not the same principle as the ancient teaching that reality is shaped by consciousness? The mathematical uncertainty principle and the mystical concept of reality creation through thought are describing the same truth through different alphabets. These philosophical musings aren't delivered with Rick's typical impatience, but with the measured cadence of someone who has discovered that contradictions aren't problems to solve, but gateways to deeper understanding. Each paradoxical statement creates a moment of cognitive dissonance that actually helps the mind relax by short-circuiting its tendency to categorize and judge. When you stop trying to separate what can be measured from what can be felt, Rick explains while adjusting a device that appears to be both technological and organic, you discover a cognitive harmony that might be the ultimate pathway to mental peace. This universe's Morty has adapted to his mentor's unified worldview, becoming an apprentice in both scientific principles and mystical practices. We observe him floating several inches above the floor in a perfect lotus position, an achievement made possible by his understanding of both gravitational field manipulation and meditative transcendence. His journal contains notes where mathematical formulas flow seamlessly into mystical diagrams, the distinction between them becoming increasingly difficult to discern as the pages progress. Occasionally, he asks questions that reveal his developing understanding. So the meditation techniques are actually altering my brain's quantum field. To which Rick responds with a gentle nod. And the quantum field adjustments are deepening your meditation. The direction of causality is another illusion we eventually transcend. The ambient soundscape of this universe perfectly embodies its harmonious duality. Electronic hums from advanced machinery blend seamlessly with the resonant tones of singing bowls, creating audio patterns that neurologically encourage alpha wave states associated with relaxation and creativity. These sounds aren't competing for attention, but rather complementing each other in a carefully orchestrated harmony. Sometimes Rick adjusts what appears to be a sound mixing console that's partially made of crystal and partially of circuitry, fine-tuning frequencies to maintain the perfect balance between technological precision and organic warmth. Contrary states of being, Rick explains while consulting both a digital readout and ancient runes simultaneously, create tension only when we insist they must be separate. The alchemists weren't failed scientists, they were early pioneers of unification theory. He gestures to a shelf where test tubes and spellbooks share space, neither seeming out of place. They understood that the process of bringing together opposites leads not just to spiritual transformation but to actual cognitive harmony. The tranquility of this space stems from its fundamental resolution of conflict. Without the tension between seemingly opposing forces, rational versus intuitive, measurable versus mystical, technological versus natural. The mind can settle into a state of acceptance that feels remarkably like relief. This Rick has transcended the need to defend his scientific principles against spiritual concepts or vice versa, allowing him to exist in a perpetual state of open curiosity rather than defensive certainty. Most minds exist in a state of constant conflict, he explains, while adjusting a device that measures both brainwaves and what he calls consciousness fields. They battle between what they can prove and what they intuitively sense. But when you harmonize these perspectives instead of forcing them to compete, you discover they were never truly separate. This integration of seemingly contradictory approaches creates a mental environment where overthinking naturally subsides, replaced by a holistic awareness that feels both intellectually satisfying and emotionally calming. The philosophical Rick demonstrates this principle through an experiment that doubles as a meditation. He places a drop of liquid onto what appears to be both a sensor pad and a ceremonial stone. As it makes contact, an equation appears in holographic form above it, while simultaneously, the same mathematical relationship manifests as a geometric pattern in the air beside it. The equation and the symbol aren't translations of each other, Rick explains. They're the same information experienced through different perceptual frameworks. When you can hold both simultaneously in your awareness, you experience a cognitive harmony that bypasses the usual mental chatter. This approach to existence, embracing paradox rather than trying to resolve it, offers viewers a profound template for handling their own mental conflicts. By watching a character typically associated with scientific dogmatism embrace the mystical without abandoning rationality, we're invited to consider how our own rigid categorizations might be creating unnecessary tension in our thinking. The science-magic fusion realm doesn't ask us to choose between different explanatory models, but encourages us to recognize how they might complement each other. While the science-magic Rick found harmony through philosophical integration, our next Rick discovered peace by changing his physical environment entirely. Beneath the waves of dimension, C7118, water doesn't just surround life, it fundamentally alters how information reaches the brain, creating a natural sanctuary from the overstimulation that keeps most minds from truly resting. Meet Aquatic Rick, a variant who abandoned the harsh cacophony of land for the muffled serenity of an underwater civilization. His laboratory, carved into a massive coral reef, stands as a testament to adaptation rather than domination. Unlike his counterparts who bend reality to their will, this Rick has allowed himself to be shaped by his environment, finding profound contentment in surrender. The physics of sound works differently here, with acoustic waves traveling 4.3 times faster than in air, but attenuating more rapidly. This creates an audio experience that's both immersive and distant. Conversations feel intimate yet dreamlike, as if filtered through layers of consciousness. For a mind as active as Rick's, this natural dampening effect serves as the perfect buffer against racing thoughts. The density of water doesn't just slow my movements, Aquatic Rick explains, through a series of melodic bubbles that rise toward the surface. It slows the very transmission of stimuli to my brain. What you land dwellers call thinking too much, we call not enough water between thoughts. Each bubble carries fragments of his voice, creating a visual representation of his words that hangs momentarily before dissolving. Philosophy made visible, then gently erased. His laboratory bears little resemblance to the chaotic workbenches of other Ricks. Tools float in specially designed alcoves, secured by gentle water currents that circulate through the room. When he needs an instrument, he doesn't grab it frantically, but instead shifts his body slightly, allowing the current to bring the tool to him. This economy of movement transforms what would normally be Rick's frenetic energy into something resembling a slow-motion dance. Lighting in this realm comes primarily from bioluminescent sources. Schools of tiny phosphorescent fish move in coordinated patterns across the ceiling, their synchronized movements creating shifting patterns that subtly transform the mood of each chamber. These living light fixtures respond to the emotional states of the room's occupants, dimming to a soft blue glow when relaxation is needed, or brightening to a gentle yellow-green when focused attention is required. The organisms here don't just produce light, Aquatic Rick notes, as a school of luminous jellyfish pulse by the viewing window. They produce specific frequencies of light that interact directly with our circadian rhythms. We've measured a 47% improvement in sleep quality compared to artificial lighting systems. As he speaks, the jellyfish seem to respond, their pulses synchronizing with the rhythm of his words. This Rick's companion, underwater Morty, has physically adapted to this environment with webbed fingers and functional gills that flutter gently at the sides of his neck. Gone is the nervous energy that typically characterizes Morty. In its place is a fluid grace as he propels himself through water with minimal effort. His movements trace graceful arcs through the water, each gesture extended and deliberate, where land-bound Mortys would twitch and fidget. Most Mortys are always worried about what's coming next, underwater Morty explains as he glides by. But down here, you can literally see things coming from further away. The pressure of the water gives you more time to react, so there's less reason to be anxious. His typically stuttering speech patterns have smoothed into a gentle, flowing cadence that complements his underwater movements. Every evening, Rick and Morty engage in a ritual of tending to their aquatic garden. Unlike terrestrial gardens with their rigid boundaries, this one exists in 3 dimensions, with sea anemones and soft corals growing in spiraling columns that stretch from the ocean floor toward the distant surface. Each species has been cultivated not just for its beauty, but for specific properties that contribute to Rick's gentle experiments in consciousness alteration. These filter-feeding polyps don't just clean the water, Rick explains as he carefully prunes a swaying purple coral. They extract compounds that would normally overload our neurological systems. Being surrounded by natural filtration systems means we're constantly being cleansed of psychological pollutants too. The coral responds to his touch by releasing a small cloud of luminescent spores that drift lazily through the water before settling on new surfaces to grow. The ambient soundscape of this universe is perhaps its most sleep-inducing feature. The constant, gentle whoosh of ocean currents creates a natural white noise effect, masking sudden sounds that might otherwise disrupt relaxation. Bubbles rise from thermal vents with rhythmic predictability, adding percussive elements that never startle but instead mark the passage of time in soothing intervals. Even Rick's underwater equipment operates with a muffled hum that blends harmoniously with the environment rather than fighting against it. Communication between Rick and Morty often happens without words. In the water's embrace, they've developed a form of movement-based language where intentions are conveyed through subtle shifts in swimming patterns. When words are necessary, they're deliberate and economical, as if each one requires precious oxygen to produce. This economy of speech fosters deeper listening, a stark contrast to the verbal barrages typical of most Rick and Morty interactions. Sound may travel faster underwater, Rick observes, but somehow it reaches us more gently. The density creates resistance that transforms harsh frequencies into something our brains interpret as non-threatening. This natural acoustic filtering removes the jarring elements from environmental sounds, leaving only those frequencies that promote relaxation and sleep. During one particularly tranquil moment, we observe Rick floating motionless in the center of his laboratory, suspended in perfect equilibrium. Perfect neutral buoyancy, he explains afterward, is the physical equivalent of a perfectly balanced mind. Neither rising nor sinking, just being. This state, difficult to achieve on land where gravity constantly pulls downward, comes naturally in the underwater environment, offering a physical manifestation of mental balance. The bioluminescent organisms that populate this realm don't just provide light, they create visual experiences specifically conducive to relaxation. Studies referenced by Aquatic Rick show that watching the slow, flowing movements of marine life, combined with the soft, diffused light of bioluminescence, reduces stress and promotes relaxation. The hypnotic patterns of light across the seafloor create a visual stimulation that's engaging enough to distract from anxious thoughts but gentle enough to promote drowsiness. Visitors to this realm often report feeling their heart rate slow and blood pressure decrease within minutes of arrival. The combination of muffled acoustics, visual softness, and physical support provided by the water creates a multisensory environment perfectly calibrated for transition to sleep. It's no coincidence that Aquatic Rick maintains the highest sleep quality metrics of any Rick in the central finite curve. Rising from the depths of the underwater sanctuary, we now ascend to a realm where solidity itself becomes optional. In dimension F217, there exists a Rick who doesn't merely observe clouds, he inhabits them. This isn't just a metaphor. Cloud Kingdom Rick has constructed his entire laboratory atop massive cumulus formations that drift through an endless twilight sky. As we float into this misty dimension, the first thing you'll notice is the complete absence of hard edges. The walls of Rick's cloud laboratory constantly reshape themselves, billowing and reforming with each passing thought. The nature of anxiety, Cloud Rick explains in a voice that seems to emerge from the vapor itself, stems from our desperate attachment to permanence in an inherently impermanent reality. His laboratory isn't merely built on clouds, it is the clouds, with corridors that fade and reform, doorways that appear exactly when needed, and windows that materialize to frame particularly beautiful horizon views. Unlike most Ricks who fight against cosmic entropy with increasingly desperate inventions, Cloud Rick has discovered profound peace by surrendering to impermanence. He's developed a philosophy that turns the very ground beneath his feet, or lack thereof, into a daily meditation on transience. What would normally trigger panic, the floor literally dissolving beneath him, has become a source of serenity. We watch as he steps confidently into seeming nothingness, the vapor reshaping itself to support his weight exactly as he trusts it will. The perpetual twilight that bathes this dimension isn't random. Research confirms that twilight lighting plays a crucial role in regulating melatonin production. The gradual dimming during dawn and dusk naturally signals the body to prepare for sleep. Cloud Kingdom exists in this perfect twilight state. Soft purples and oranges painting the horizon in an endless sunset that never fully transitions to night. This consistent twilight creates ideal conditions for the body to maintain its readiness for sleep without ever fully demanding it. In this realm, Rick conducts his most fascinating experiments. Rather than focusing on dimension hopping or creating destructive devices, he's developed methods for capturing the dream essence from sleeping birds that nest in neighboring cloud formations. These avian creatures, with translucent feathers that reflect the perpetual sunset, naturally produce theta brainwaves as they drift in and out of consciousness while floating on air currents. Cloud formations don't just look dreamy, Rick explains to a half-attentive Morty. They actually emit frequencies that synchronize with theta brainwaves, the same ones that dominate our minds during the transition to sleep. We watch as he carefully extracts a shimmering vapor from a sleeping bird, collecting it in a floating container that has no clear boundaries itself. The extracted essence glows with soft internal light, creating patterns that mimic the shape of thoughts themselves. The ambient soundscape of the Cloud Kingdom adds another layer to its sleep-inducing properties. Distant thunder rolls across the horizon, but unlike Earth's thunderstorms, these sounds never startle or frighten. Instead, they create a gentle rumbling backdrop that functions as a cosmic lullaby. The thunder doesn't signal danger. It forms part of the natural rhythm of this place, like the beating of a massive heart somewhere beyond the horizon. We observe Rick and Morty as they recline on what can only be described as cloud chairs, their bodies partially merging with the misty environment. The boundary between person and place blurs in the Cloud Kingdom, creating a visual representation of what meditation practices have taught for centuries: the illusory nature of separation between self and environment. "You know what's wild, Morty?" Rick asks, his voice quieter than we've ever heard it. "We spend our lives trying to build solid walls between ourselves and everything else, only to discover at the end that those boundaries were imaginary." Morty doesn't respond verbally, but a small eddy of vapor swirls from his partially dissolved form, as if his thoughts themselves have become visible. The animation style used to depict this universe is deliberately unique. Characters and objects have soft, blurred edges that mimic watercolor paintings come to life. This technique isn't merely aesthetic. Watercolor animation with its fluid, flowing nature mirrors how our minds process information during sleep transitions. The subtle variations in color and texture provide gentle visual stimulation that prevents the mind from becoming bored while maintaining a profound sense of calm. In one particularly mesmerizing sequence, we watch as Rick demonstrates how cloud formations in this dimension contain not just water vapor, but crystallized thought fragments. When collected and distilled properly, these thought crystals can be used to influence dreams. He releases a small vial of processed thought vapor into the air, where it forms intricate, slowly rotating geometric patterns that hover between them. Most people think meditation is about emptying the mind, Rick explains, as the patterns gradually shift from complex to simple forms. But it's really about watching thoughts form and dissolve without attachment, just like these clouds. The patterns eventually simplify to a single pulsing point of light that fades into the general mist of the room. The cloud laboratory features numerous memory pools, depressions in the cloud floor that collect and display past experiences as gently rippling reflections. Unlike the harsh flashbacks of regular memories, these pools allow Rick and Morty to observe past events with emotional detachment, seeing them as neither good nor bad, but simply experiences that have shaped them. Visitors often report feeling lighter after gazing into these pools, as if the burden of their own histories has partially evaporated. Rick's research in this dimension focuses on what he calls transitional consciousness states, the moments between wakefulness and sleep when the mind is most receptive to suggestion and pattern recognition. By studying these states, he's developed technologies that ease this transition, helping minds that typically race with anxiety to gentle themselves toward rest. Perhaps most striking is how Cloud Rick moves through his environment. His typically jerky, manic movements have been replaced by a fluid grace. He doesn't walk so much as flow from one area to another, his lab coat, itself partially vapor, billowing behind him like a living extension of his thoughts. When he needs to travel longer distances, he simply disperses his form into the general cloud mass, reforming where he intends to be. Transportation becomes unnecessary, he explains, when you realize location is just another attachment. The ephemeral, constantly shifting cloud environments create a visual experience that perfectly mimics the transition into sleep. As our own consciousness begins to blur while watching, the boundaries between viewer and viewed start to dissolve. We're not just observing this peaceful Rick universe. We're experiencing the same state of gentle transition that Cloud Rick has mastered. The constant reforming of familiar shapes into new configurations mirrors how our thoughts reshape themselves as we drift towards sleep, becoming more abstract and fluid. Cloud Rick has discovered something profound that other Ricks miss in their quest for control. By embracing impermanence rather than fighting it, anxiety itself dissolves like morning mist. His laboratory isn't just a place for scientific discovery. It's a physical manifestation of a mind that has found peace through acceptance of change. In a dimension far removed from the ephemeral clouds, there exists a sanctuary where knowledge reigns supreme. The eternal library stretches beyond what the human mind can comprehend, its towering shelves disappearing into shadows that seem to fold into other dimensions entirely. Here we find perhaps the most unexpected variant of the smartest man in the universe, one who has chosen to dedicate his genius not to domination or invention, but to the preservation and organization of wisdom itself. Bibliophile. Rick moves with a deliberate grace through the endless aisles, his fingers trailing along leather-bound spines with reverence rather than the impatient energy we typically associate with the multiverse's most restless mind. The perpetual autumn light filtering through impossibly tall windows bathes everything in a warm, golden glow that makes even the dust motes dancing in the air seem purposeful and profound. This carefully curated illumination isn't just beautiful. It serves a psychological purpose that librarian Rick understands deeply. The human brain recognizes the golden light of late afternoon as a signal of safety. Rick explains in a soft, measured tone as he adjusts a row of books from dimension C137b. Something about that specific wavelength triggers our most primal sense of security. It's why people find it easier to surrender consciousness in this light. Their evolutionary programming tells them predators are settling down for the evening. His explanation lacks the condescending edge we're accustomed to, replaced instead by the gentle enthusiasm of someone sharing a beloved fact. The architecture of this massive library itself seems designed to induce a state of tranquility. Ceilings soar overhead, creating a sense of spaciousness that prevents the millions of volumes from feeling claustrophobic. Reading nooks are positioned at carefully calculated intervals, some exposed to the communal space and others tucked away for more private contemplation. High-arched windows allow natural light to penetrate deep into the library's heart, eliminating the institutional feel that artificial lighting might create. The ambient soundscape here is unlike anything we've encountered in other dimensions. The gentle turning of pages creates a rhythmic backdrop that Rick explains serves as a form of natural white noise. The predictable sound of paper against paper masks external distractions while providing just enough auditory stimulation to prevent the mind from creating its own distractions, he notes while retrieving a massive tome from a high shelf. The distant creaking of wooden shelves settling and the soft padding of footsteps on carpeted floors complete this audio environment that seems explicitly designed to lull visitors into a state of peaceful alertness. Every evening, Rick performs what he calls the reading, a ritual where he selects a single volume from his infinite collection to share with Morty. Today, he pulls down Temporal Paradoxes and Their Resolution, a text from a dimension where time flows backward. Rather than rushing through the material as most Ricks would, he reads each page with careful attention, his voice maintaining a gentle monotone that somehow enhances rather than diminishes the profound concepts being discussed. Most libraries are designed to keep knowledge in, librarian Rick explains between chapters. This one is designed to let consciousness out. He gestures to the comfortable seating arranged throughout the space. Chairs that seem to anticipate the exact curve of a reader's spine, couches that offer just enough support without being too firm to relax into. The arrangement of seating influences how people perceive and interact with their environment. These chairs are positioned to reduce stress levels while maintaining optimal blood flow to the brain. Morty sits cross-legged on a cushioned window seat, his usual nervousness nowhere to be seen as he listens attentively. Occasionally, he asks questions, but they lack the panicked edge we typically hear. So, if knowledge exists across all dimensions simultaneously, does that mean there's, like, a universal truth? In this universe, Morty has grown accustomed to philosophical inquiry rather than dimensional crisis management. What an interesting question, Rick responds, genuinely pleased rather than dismissive. The multiverse contains contradictory truths that are simultaneously valid in their respective dimensions. The greatest wisdom may be in recognizing that pattern rather than seeking a single answer. He returns to reading, giving Morty time to consider this perspective without pressure for an immediate response. The camera slowly pans across shelves containing titles that boggle the mind. Non-Euclidean Geometry for Non-Euclidean Beings, The Complete History of Earth, Z456, Volumes 1 to 7000, and Consciousness as a Quantum Field, A Beginner's Guide. The steady movement creates a hypnotic visual experience, drawing viewers deeper into this literary sanctuary. Unlike other Ricks who weaponize information for personal gain, librarian Rick finds fulfillment in the organization and preservation of knowledge for its own sake. He has developed a complex cataloging system that accounts for interdimensional variations in language, physics, and consciousness itself. Understanding something doesn't mean you need to control it, he remarks, while returning a book to its proper place with careful precision. Most Ricks miss that distinction. The therapeutic value of stories isn't lost on this Rick variant. He explains the concept of bibliotherapy, using literature to aid in mental and emotional healing, as he guides us through a section dedicated to narrative-based remedies for various conditions. Engaging with stories provides a form of escape that allows individuals to detach temporarily from their worries, he explains. The right book at the right time can be more effective than any sedative I could synthesize. The selection of reading material is particularly important before sleep, Rick notes, as the library's ambient lighting subtly dims to mimic the progression of evening. Predictable plots and calming themes prepare the mind for rest. The imagination becomes stimulated in ways that create comfortable mental spaces for dreams to form. He demonstrates by selecting a volume of interdimensional folktales known for their gentle narrative arcs. What makes librarian Rick perhaps the most dangerous Rick in the multiverse isn't his scientific knowledge, but his understanding of the power of ideas and how they shape consciousness. Any Rick can build a weapon, he muses, organizing a shelf of quantum philosophy texts. But few understand that perspective itself is the most powerful force in existence. Change how someone sees reality, and you've changed reality for them. As night approaches in this perpetual afternoon realm, Rick moves to adjust the lighting, explaining that the warm-toned fixtures are specifically designed to mimic the effects of late-day sun, promoting melatonin production. The body's natural sleep-wake cycle responds to these visual cues regardless of actual time, he explains. It's remarkable how easily the mind can be guided toward rest with the right environmental signals. The Eternal Library exists as a sanctuary not just for books, but for the mind itself. A place where time seems suspended between pages, creating what Rick calls a psychological space that your brain instantly recognizes as safe for surrendering consciousness. His measured movements, the carefully structured environment, and the gentle sharing of knowledge all work in concert to create perhaps the most sleep-conducive dimension in the entire multiverse. Across the multiverse exists a realm where sound transcends its invisible nature and transforms into something you can't actually see floating before your eyes. In the harmonic nebula, a Rick has discovered that the most profound universal language isn't spoken at all. It's experienced through both ears and eyes simultaneously. This dimension represents perhaps the most perfect synthesis of sensory experience, where the barrier between hearing and seeing has completely dissolved. This particular Rick hasn't simply modified his scientific approach. He's fundamentally reinvented it. Where other Ricks manipulate matter and energy, this one orchestrates frequencies and wavelengths. His laboratory bears little resemblance to the cluttered garage we're familiar with. Instead, we see a vast circular chamber that more closely resembles a planetarium, its domed ceiling displaying the actual cosmos above. But unlike traditional planetariums that merely project images, this one captures the authentic vibrations of celestial bodies and transforms them into both sound and visible color. The most striking thing about Harmonic Rick is his complete abandonment of verbal communication. He hasn't spoken a word in years, having discovered that musical expression carries infinitely more nuance than language ever could. When he needs to communicate with Morty, he simply plays a sequence of notes on one of his many custom instruments, and beautiful patterns emerge in the air. Swirling nebulas of color that convey not just information, but emotional context and subtle meaning impossible to capture in mere words. The instruments themselves defy conventional design. We see what appears to be a modified harp, but its strings extend upward and connect directly to telescope-like devices, pointing at different quadrants of space. Each string resonates with the frequency of a specific celestial body, the deep, rhythmic pulsation of neutron stars, the high, shimmering notes of distant quasars, or the gentle harmonic overtones of planetary rotations. When played together, they create a cosmic symphony that physically manifests as patterns of colored light that hang in the air. We observe Rick in what appears to be his evening composition ritual. He sits before his instruments, eyes closed in concentration as his fingers move with delicate precision across the controls. Above him, a distant neutron star's pulsations are being captured by his instruments. The star beats with perfect regularity, about 60 cycles per minute, remarkably similar to a resting human heart rate. As Rick begins to translate these cosmic vibrations into audible sound, we see soft blue waves emerging from the instruments, hanging in the air like illuminated fog. This version of Morty plays an essential role in the musical process. Born with natural synesthesia, a neurological condition where stimulation of one sense triggers experiences in another, he perceives sounds as colors and shapes without any technological assistance. Where Rick requires instruments to make music visible, Morty sees it naturally. This makes him the perfect assistant, able to fine-tune the visual output of Rick's compositions for maximum harmonic balance. We watch as Morty moves his hands through the air, gently adjusting the color patterns as if molding invisible clay, shifting blues toward purple when certain notes play, creating perfect visual harmony that matches the auditory experience. The tempo of the music here exists on a completely different timescale than we're accustomed to. Notes that would last seconds in conventional music are sustained for minutes, creating an experience of profoundly stretched time. A single melodic phrase might unfold over 15 minutes, giving listeners time to appreciate the complex interplay of harmonics that would normally pass too quickly to consciously perceive. This extreme tempo reduction synchronizes perfectly with brainwave patterns associated with pre-sleep states, essentially tuning the viewer's consciousness to a frequency conducive to rest. NASA scientists in our own dimension have created sonification projects that translate astronomical data into audible form, but Harmonic Rick has taken this concept infinitely further. He doesn't merely translate the data, he captures the actual vibrational essence of cosmic phenomena. When he plays the music of a specific star system, the sounds and colors don't just represent that system. They contain some essential quality of it, as if each celestial body has its own musical signature that expresses its true nature. The visual patterns created by this music aren't random. They subtly guide the eye in movement patterns similar to those occurring naturally during REM sleep. As we watch these colors drift and swirl, our eyes follow paths that neurologically prime the brain for dream states. This creates a unique transitional experience where conscious viewing gradually blends into the beginning stages of sleep, making it particularly effective for viewers struggling with the difficult transition from wakefulness to slumber. Music therapy researchers in our dimension have documented how specific musical elements can reduce anxiety, lower blood pressure, and decrease stress hormone production. Harmonic Rick has intuitively mastered these principles, crafting compositions that work simultaneously on multiple physiological levels. The bass notes vibrate at frequencies that physically relax muscle tension, while higher harmonics stimulate the production of alpha brainwaves associated with meditative states. During one particularly beautiful sequence, we watch as Rick captures the sounds of a distant stellar nursery, a region where new stars are being born. The resulting composition manifests as gentle pulses of golden light that gradually shift to soft pink and then to deep purple. These colors spread through the room like a gentle tide, moving in patterns that mimic natural breathing rhythms. Without a word being spoken, we understand this is Rick's interpretation of cosmic creation, birth rendered as music rather than explained through scientific terminology. Unlike the frantic adventures we typically associate with Rick and Morty, where danger lurks in every dimension and catastrophe is narrowly averted through quick thinking and quicker action, the Harmonic Nebula transforms potential chaos into structured beauty. What would be an explosive confrontation in another dimension becomes here a complex counterpoint of contrasting frequencies. What might be a desperate escape becomes a carefully modulated transition between musical modes. The underlying emotions, fear, excitement, triumph, are still present, but they're expressed as variations in tone and color rather than through physical action. Relationships in this dimension aren't built through shared experiences or conversations, but through musical collaboration. We observe how Rick and Morty's bond manifests when they compose together. Rick initiating a melodic phrase that Morty completes, their musical ideas overlapping and enhancing each other without ever requiring verbal negotiation. There's a profound level of mutual understanding that transcends the need for words, creating perhaps the most harmonious Rick-Morty relationship in the multiverse. For viewers struggling with racing thoughts that prevent sleep, the Harmonic Nebula offers a perfect antidote. The complex yet structured nature of the visual music provides just enough cognitive engagement to distract the overthinking mind, while the physiological effects of the sound frequencies simultaneously induce physical relaxation. It's a carefully balanced experience that neither bores the active mind nor stimulates it too much, creating instead a perfect glide path toward unconsciousness. From cosmic symphonies that guide us towards sleep, we float weightlessly into a garden suspended between worlds. In this dimension, the very concept of weight has been reimagined, with gravity reduced to just a fraction of Earth's pull. Our bodies feel suddenly unburdened, as if the invisible hand constantly pressing down on our shoulders has finally relaxed its grip. It's in this gentle embrace of reduced gravity that we discover another Rick who's found his peculiar peace. This Rick has transformed what most would consider a scientific anomaly into an art form. His botanical sanctuary consists of floating islands of soil and rock that drift slowly through the air, each one hosting a collection of plants that could never exist under normal gravitational conditions. These aren't just Earth plants adapting to weightlessness. They're entirely new species that have evolved in this environment, with biological structures that would collapse under standard gravity. "I've stopped fighting against natural forces," low gravity Rick explains as he drifts past us, his lab coat billowing around him in slow, graceful waves. Most Ricks try to bend physics to their will. I just found a corner of the multiverse where physics already works the way I prefer. We observe how the reduced gravity affects everything in this environment. Water doesn't flow downward, but instead forms perfect spheres that hover in the air, catching light and creating prismatic rainbows. Rick uses these floating water globes as natural irrigation systems for his gardens, gently nudging them toward thirsty plants where they gradually merge with the soil in a mesmerizing dance of absorption. The plants themselves show behaviors impossible on Earth. Without the constant downward pull, their growth patterns become unpredictable and seemingly random. Some extend their stems in spiral patterns, while others grow in perfect spherical formations with leaves extending in all directions. Root systems don't drive downward, but instead create intricate three-dimensional networks that resemble neural pathways, seeking nutrients in every direction rather than just below. "Look at this specimen," Rick says, gesturing toward what appears to be a cross between an orchid and a jellyfish. Its translucent petals pulse gently, as if breathing, while filament-like structures extend outward in a perfect radial pattern. On Earth, these petals would collapse under their own weight. Here, they can extend to their full potential without structural compromise. Rick's morning ritual is particularly soothing to witness. He begins at the center of his garden and uses nothing more than gentle breaths to propel himself from one floating island to another. His movements are deliberate and efficient, conserving energy and maintaining perfect control of his trajectory. There's something profoundly peaceful about watching someone navigate three-dimensional space with such effortless grace. "The key is to stop thinking in terms of up and down," he explains while pruning a plant with tendrils that grow in perfect concentric circles. "Those are Earth concepts. Here, there's only toward and away from. It changes how you move, how you think, and eventually, how you feel." The soundscape of this environment is unlike anything we've experienced before. Without normal gravity affecting the propagation of sound waves, voices take on ethereal qualities. Words seem to hang in the air longer, creating a gentle echo effect that turns conversations into something resembling music. Footsteps, when feet actually touch surfaces, are almost completely silent. Even the rustling of leaves has a dreamlike quality. Higher frequencies dissipate quickly while lower tones linger, creating an audio experience that naturally soothes the central nervous system. Low gravity. Rick moves with the deliberate flow of a Tai Chi master, his body drifting through space in continuous, unbroken motions. There are no jerky movements here, no sudden starts and stops that might trigger alertness in viewers. Even his hand gestures seem choreographed, creating gentle arcs through the air as he tends to his floating garden. His fingers dance among the plants with precision that comes from years of practice, adjusting their position relative to light sources and water globes with subtle touches. Anxiety is partially a physical response, Rick notes, while gently rotating a spherical cluster of luminescent fungi. On Earth, your body is constantly fighting gravity, tensing muscles, maintaining posture, pushing against downward force. That physical tension becomes psychological tension. Here, that burden is lifted, quite literally. Even Morty seems transformed in this environment. His typically anxious demeanor has softened, his movements becoming more deliberate and his voice losing its characteristic nervous edge. We watch as he assists his grandfather, learning to navigate between the floating islands using controlled breathing techniques rather than frantic paddling motions. "It took me weeks to stop flailing," Morty admits, with a calm smile that would look out of place on his Earth counterpart. "Your instincts tell you to swim or climb, but that just sends you spinning. You have to unlearn all those earthbound habits." The camera work in this universe mirrors the environmental effects, drifting lazily between scenes rather than cutting abruptly. Transitions are accomplished through gentle pans and slow zooms that maintain the feeling of floating. This creates a seamless viewing experience that never jolts the viewer back to alertness with sudden changes. Even when shifting focus from one area of the garden to another, the movement feels natural and flowing, like being carried by a gentle current. Rick's botanical laboratory contains specimens organized not in traditional rows but in three-dimensional clusters that allow him to work from any angle. His tools float nearby in a carefully arranged constellation, each one tethered by nearly invisible filaments that allow him to draw them to his hand with the slightest tug. Nothing here is ever out of reach, a physical manifestation of the mental state Rick has achieved. The distribution of water and nutrients works differently here, he explains, showing us how he's adapted his cultivation techniques. Plants don't develop the same structural support systems they would under constant downward pressure. Instead, they invest that energy in expansion and reproduction. They're literally less stressed on a cellular level. We watch as Rick demonstrates communication with his plants through subtle vibrations. He runs a finger along a resonant crystal, creating tones that cause certain species to unfurl new growth or change color. They respond to frequency rather than touch, he explains. Another adaptation to an environment where physical contact might send them drifting away. The psychological effects of this environment become more apparent the longer we stay. There's a profound sense of liberation that comes from moving in 3 dimensions without constraint. Thoughts seem to flow more easily, unburdened by the physical tension we've grown so accustomed to that we've forgotten it exists. It's as if gravity itself has been applying a subtle but constant pressure to our minds, and only in its absence do we recognize the weight we've been carrying. Leaving behind the freedom of 3-dimensional movement, we encounter something even more fundamental to our existence that can be manipulated: the flow of time itself. In this strange corner of the multiverse, Rick hasn't conquered time like most versions of himself would attempt. Instead, he's found a natural anomaly where seconds, minutes, and hours flow like water through an endless meadow. Some areas experience rapid currents, where moments rush by in a blur, while others form tranquil pools where time nearly stands still. Rick has built his home at the intersection of these varying temporal streams, allowing him to step from one flow rate to another as easily as we might move from sunshine into shade. In Western cultures, time is often viewed as linear and quantifiable, Rick explains, as he guides us through his temporal garden. He gestures toward a fast-flowing stream of shimmering purple energy. Everyone's always obsessed with schedules and deadlines, the constant forward march. But that's just one way to conceptualize it. We follow him to a section where the air itself seems thicker, more viscous, the colors shifting to deep blues that pulse with hypnotic slowness. Eastern philosophies often see time as cyclical or non-linear, a continuous flow rather than discrete moments. What makes this Rick unique isn't technological superiority, but philosophical adaptation. Where other Ricks would build time machines and manipulate the continuum for advantage, temporal Rick has synchronized his existence with these natural rhythms. His morning might begin in a rapid zone where he completes complex calculations in minutes that would take hours elsewhere, then transition to a slow pool for deep contemplation. His daily routines aren't governed by clocks, but by the shifting patterns of temporal currents that sweep across his property like weather systems. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of the temporal meadows is the slow pool, a depression in reality where time barely crawls forward. Here, thoughts that would normally race through consciousness too quickly to examine can be observed, studied, and understood. We watch as Rick sits cross-legged at its edge, carefully extending just his hand into the glistening blue energy. His fingers move with glacial slowness as a single thought unfolds over the course of several minutes, allowing him to examine every nuance and implication before it passes. This is what meditation attempts to achieve, he tells us, his voice shifting pitch as it crosses temporal boundaries. During traditional meditation, your perception of time undergoes significant shifts, expanding or contracting until you reach a sense of timelessness. He smiles as his hand gradually withdraws from the slow pool. I just made the process a bit more literal. Communication in the temporal meadows follows rules, unlike anywhere else in the multiverse. As we observe Rick and Morty converse across time differentials, their interaction takes on an almost musical quality. Morty stands in a moderate zone while Rick speaks from a rapid area, causing his words to stretch and slow as they cross the boundary between zones. The result is a conversation where questions and answers don't follow in neat succession, but overlap and interweave, creating patterns of meaning rather than linear dialogue. It's like the difference between Western music with its structured time signatures and Eastern musical traditions that emphasize continuous flow, Rick explains as his words visibly ripple through the air. Both are valid expressions of reality, just different perspectives on the same fundamental truth. The visual experience of the temporal meadows defies easy description. Different time zones are represented through subtle color shifts and transparency effects that create a dreamlike landscape. In faster zones, colors trend toward energetic yellows and oranges, while slower regions manifest in calming blues and purples. At the boundaries between zones, these colors blend and shift, creating aurora-like patterns that dance across the landscape. We can actually see multiple moments existing simultaneously, a phenomenon Rick calls temporal transparency, where past, present, and future overlay each other like sheets of colored glass. The Buddhist concept of impermanence resonates strongly here, Rick notes, as we observe a flower blooming and wilting repeatedly in a temporal eddy. Everything exists in a constant state of change. Nothing lasts forever. When you truly accept that, anxiety begins to dissolve. This Rick has developed a unique serenity that seems foreign to the character we know. He explains that living in a place where time itself is malleable has fundamentally altered his relationship with urgency. Nothing is truly pressing when you can always find a pocket of extended time, he says, while casually watching a hummingbird frozen mid-flight in a slow zone. The fear of not having enough time drives so much human anxiety, but it's based on a limited understanding of what time actually is. The ambient soundscape of the temporal meadows adds another layer to its tranquil atmosphere. The gentle ticking of time itself manifests as visible ripples in the air that create soft chiming notes when they intersect. These sounds vary based on which temporal zones are interacting. Rapid currents meeting slow pools produce deep, resonant tones, while similar flow rates create harmonious chords. The overall effect is a constantly shifting musical composition that seems to both anticipate and echo the movements of its inhabitants. Perhaps most fascinating is how the concept of time perception during the transition to sleep manifests physically in this realm. Along the outer edges of Rick's property lies a region he calls the drowsy boundary, an area where time begins to behave exactly as it does when humans are falling asleep. Here, reality and dreams begin to blur, and perception becomes fluid and distorted. What happens naturally in your mind as you drift off happens literally in this space, Rick explains, as we move through this zone. Our perception starts to shift. Moments stretch and contract unpredictably, and the distinction between observation and imagination becomes increasingly unclear. The landscape itself seems to breathe with a gentle rhythm that mimics the slowing cadence of pre-sleep brainwaves. Rick notes that visitors who spend time in this region report improved sleep quality afterward, as their minds become accustomed to the transition between wakefulness and dreams. It's like training wheels for your consciousness, he says with a rare smile. After experiencing literal time distortion here, your brain recognizes the pattern when it happens naturally during your sleep cycle. In a particularly beautiful area where multiple temporal currents converge, Rick has created what he calls a consciousness garden, a place where thoughts themselves become visible as glowing motes that drift on time's currents. Here, we observe how ideas form, develop, and transform as they pass through different temporal zones. Some thoughts dissolve quickly in fast currents, while others develop complex structures in slower regions. Rick explains that this visualization helps him understand how different cultural perspectives on time influence thought patterns. Western linear time creates certain types of cognition, he says, pointing to a straight-flowing current where thoughts maintain rigid structures, while cyclical time concepts generate different patterns entirely. He gestures to a slowly rotating eddy where thoughts circle back upon themselves, growing more complex with each revolution. Neither is inherently better, they're just different tools for understanding reality. As our visit to the temporal meadows nears its end, we realize something peculiar about our experience. What felt like perhaps 30 minutes has actually been several hours according to our watches. Rick smiles knowingly at our confusion. Time is inherently subjective, he explains. What feels like mere minutes for viewers might represent hours within the narrative. That's why this place makes for such perfect sleep viewing. It gently detaches you from your normal perception of duration. The subjective nature of time and temporal meadows finds its internal counterpart in our next universe. If our perception of 30 minutes stretching into hours was fascinating, imagine what happens when that brilliant mind turns inward, applying its full capacity to understanding the most mysterious state of human existence. This Rick hasn't built a lab to control the external world. He's built a bridge between wakefulness and dreams. Moving into our final universe, we encounter a version of Rick who decided that understanding consciousness itself was the ultimate scientific frontier. The dimly lit workshop we enter isn't filled with weapons or interdimensional portals, but instead houses what might be the most humane invention in the multiverse, a machine that crafts perfect dreams. This dream engineer Rick has dedicated decades to understanding not just how to traverse dimensions, but how to navigate the landscape of the unconscious mind. The workshop itself exists in a perpetual twilight state, neither fully illuminated nor completely dark. Soft blue lighting emanates from various instruments that line the walls, creating an atmosphere that makes visitors instinctively lower their voices. The room itself seems to exist in that liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, the hypnagogic state where reality begins to bend without fully breaking. Unlike the harsh laboratory lighting most Ricks prefer, this environment is specifically designed to ease the transition between consciousness states. What's immediately striking about the dream engineer's workspace is how his scientific precision remains intact while all harshness has been removed. His dream-capturing devices feature rounded edges rather than the typical sharp angles found in most Rick inventions. Sleep monitors hum, with a barely perceptible vibration instead of harsh beeping. Each consciousness tuner, devices that adjust brainwave patterns, is calibrated with an uncharacteristic gentleness that seems foreign to the Rick we know. The brain produces specific frequencies during different sleep stages, dream engineer Rick explains in a voice notably softer than we're accustomed to hearing. Most sleep laboratories focus only on measuring these states, but I've developed technology that can actually induce and guide them. As he speaks, his voice gradually drops in volume, becoming more soothing with each sentence. By the end of his explanations, he's practically whispering, unconsciously guiding visitors toward a state of relaxation. This Rick's life work centers around creating a comprehensive atlas of restful states across species and dimensions. Holographic displays show the dream architectures of beings from countless worlds, some resembling elaborate cathedrals of thought, others appearing as flowing rivers of consciousness. Dreams aren't random neural firings, he explains while adjusting dials on a monitoring station. They're precisely engineered experiences that serve vital functions for cognitive processing. I've just improved the engineering. The evening ritual in this workshop is something to behold. As night approaches, Rick prepares to test his own inventions, a testament to his scientific integrity. He slowly lowers himself into a specially designed sleep chamber that resembles something between a medical pod and a luxury bed. The chamber itself contains no sharp edges or harsh surfaces. Everything is designed to facilitate the transition to sleep rather than jolt the body into awareness. Morty's role in this universe is equally fascinating. Rather than being dragged into dangerous adventures, he sits calmly at a monitoring station, observing his grandfather's brain patterns displayed on screens that pulse with gentle colors corresponding to different sleep stages. Morty has a natural aptitude for reading brainwave patterns, Rick explains before entering his chamber. Some minds can naturally sense the rhythm of consciousness in others. His sensitivity makes him the perfect sleep technician. The ambient soundscape of this workshop creates its own form of auditory sedative. The gentle humming of dream machines produces frequencies specifically calibrated to complement the brain's natural rhythms during pre-sleep states. Soft beeping from sleep monitors follows patterns that induce rather than interrupt relaxation. Most remarkably, this Rick has developed technology that makes dreams themselves audible, translating neural activity into sound waves that manifest as gentle symphonies of the unconscious mind. "Listen," Rick whispers, as he adjusts a dial. This is the sound of a perfect dream state. What follows is difficult to describe. A shifting landscape of sounds that seems to bypass the ears entirely and speak directly to something deeper in consciousness. It's neither music nor noise, but something that exists between categories, much like dreams themselves. As Rick settles into his sleep chamber for the night, he offers one final insight. Most people fear sleep because it resembles death, a surrender of control. But properly understood, sleep is the ultimate act of scientific precision. The brain isn't shutting down. It's activating incredibly sophisticated maintenance and integration protocols. His eyelids grow heavy as he speaks. My work isn't about escaping reality through dreams, but understanding the reality of dreams themselves. The monitoring equipment shows Rick's brainwaves transitioning from beta to alpha and then theta patterns as he drifts deeper into sleep. Morty makes minor adjustments to the dream machine, ensuring his grandfather receives the optimal sleep experience. The entire process transforms what most consider a passive state into an active, scientifically informed process. What makes this final universe so perfect for our journey is how it brings us full circle. The Dream Engineer. Rick has created a scientific approach to surrendering consciousness, the very thing viewers seek when turning to sleep videos. By observing his methods and understanding the architecture of perfect sleep, we too are guided toward that elusive state of restful surrender. As Rick falls deeper into sleep, the lights in the workshop dim further until only the soft glow of monitoring equipment remains. The sound of his breathing becomes rhythmic and deep. Morty adjusts one final setting and then leans back in his chair, his own eyelids growing heavy as the peaceful atmosphere affects him too. The most powerful aspect of Dream Engineer Rick's approach is how he transforms something typically approached with anxiety, the surrender to unconsciousness, into a fascinating scientific journey worthy of wonder and appreciation. Through his innovative understanding of the sleep process, we're invited to view our own nightly surrender not as a loss of control, but as an entry into another form of existence equally worth exploring. For those struggling with racing thoughts at bedtime, the Dream Engineer's workshop offers a powerful reframing. Rather than fighting against the transition to sleep, we're shown how to approach it with scientific curiosity and gentle intention. The boundaries between wakefulness and dreams become less frightening when understood as different expressions of the same consciousness rather than opposing states. Imagine a place where physics don't work quite right, a universe where massive pastel clouds float through an endless sunset sky and serve as the literal foundation for an entire civilization. This is exactly where Rick's portal gun decides to malfunction, depositing our unlikely duo onto what Rick describes as probably the fluffiest cumulus cloud in the multiverse, Morty. As they bounce gently on the impossibly soft surface, we see Morty's initial panic about falling through quickly transform into wonder, as the cloud holds their weight like some kind of cosmic memory foam mattress. The horizon stretches out in every direction, painted in perpetual shades of lavender, peach, and gold, a sunset that never quite commits to becoming night. Other clouds dot the skyscape, each one housing intricate structures that look almost like cotton candy castles, connected by rainbow bridges that materialize and dissolve as needed. As Rick fumbles with his malfunctioning portal gun, cursing under his breath about quantum static interference, Morty notices movement in the fluffy landscape around them. The inhabitants of this strange kingdom emerge cautiously from what appear to be cloud caves, small, fuzzy blue creatures about the size of house cats, but with impossibly long eyelashes that flutter hypnotically with each blink. They surround Rick and Morty in a curious semicircle, not saying a word but communicating through an elaborate series of gentle sighs that vary in pitch and duration. Rick, surprisingly, nods along as if he understands every nuance of their breathy language. They want to know if we're Stormbringers, Rick explains, reaching into his lab coat. Apparently, this dimension gets visitors that sometimes disturb the, molecular harmony or whatever. Mess with the weather patterns. I told them we're just passing through. He pulls out a small vial containing what looks like water with a faint blue luminescence. Lucky for us, I've got exactly what they want. Morty watches in growing confusion as Rick uncorks the vial and holds it up to the nearest cloud creature, whose eyelashes begin to flutter rapidly in what appears to be excitement. What is that stuff? Morty asks, watching the creatures crowd closer. Bottled raindrops from dimension C137, Rick explains matter-of-factly. They consider it exotic precipitation, like fancy imported water, but for clouds. Supply and demand, Morty. Economics works the same even in a place where gravity doesn't. To demonstrate his point, Rick casually steps sideways and floats up about 3 feet before gently settling back onto the cloud surface. Gotta love selective gravitational fields. A larger cloud creature approaches, distinguished by silver-tipped eyelashes and what almost resembles a crown made of miniature storm clouds. It releases a particularly complex series of sighs, to which Rick responds by bowing slightly and offering his vial. "That's their leader," he whispers to Morty. "King Nimbostratus the Billowing. Just agreed to let us crash here for the night in exchange for my collection of exotic precipitation." The transaction unfolds in slow motion, the Cloud King's impossibly delicate appendage, somewhere between a paw and a wisp of fog, accepting the vial while releasing a sigh that somehow sounds both grateful and suspicious. As Rick negotiates further, pulling increasingly bizarre items from his seemingly bottomless pockets, Morty takes in more details of this strange realm. He notices that the clouds themselves seem responsive to the emotions of their inhabitants. When a group of younger cloud creatures play what looks like a game of tag, their section of the cloudscape forms small hills and valleys perfectly suited for hiding and seeking. When two older creatures engage in what appears to be a serious conversation, their surrounding cloud densifies slightly, creating a sense of privacy. "Rick," Morty whispers, "the clouds are changing shape based on what everyone's thinking." He waves his hand experimentally, imagining a small castle, and watches in amazement as the cloud beneath his palm rises and forms tiny turrets and windows before dissolving back to formlessness. That's because this whole dimension exists in a perpetual state between waking and dreaming, Rick explains, having apparently concluded his bartering session. He's now the proud owner of what looks like a cloud deed, a wisp of fog somehow folded into a document-like shape. The normal boundaries between thought and reality are super thin here. Perfect ecosystem for beings that evolved to need minimal sleep. They're basically dreaming and awake at the same time, all the time. The sun, if it can be called that in this strange place, hasn't moved from its position just below the horizon, casting long golden rays through the cloud kingdom. Yet somehow, the quality of light has shifted subtly, taking on a softer, more muted quality that suggests evening without any actual progression of time. "So we're stuck here for the night?" Morty asks, trying to sound annoyed but failing as he watches a distant group of cloud creatures shape their home into elaborate, spiraling towers simply by dancing around it. Portal guns recalibrating. Should be ready by morning. Whatever morning means in a place with no actual day-night cycle, Rick says, flopping back onto the cloud surface, which immediately reshapes to form something resembling a recliner. Could be worse places to be stranded. At least nothing here is trying to kill us. Yet. As they settle in, the gentle bobbing motion of the cloud becomes more noticeable, a rhythmic up and down that feels strangely synchronized with breathing. Rick continues his negotiations with various cloud creatures, trading items that seem increasingly ridiculous. A paperclip that Rick claims comes from the universe where all metal is sentient, a rubber band that supposedly spans 11 dimensions when stretched, and what appears to be an ordinary breath mint that Rick insists is crystallized time from the Big Bang. The cloud creatures accept each item with reverent sighs, floating away with their treasures as Rick accumulates more wispy deed-like documents. "Real estate investment, Morty," Rick explains, though he seems more amused by the transactions than genuinely interested in cloud property ownership. Morty finds himself sinking deeper into the cloud surface, which has become increasingly comfortable, molding perfectly to his body like the world's most perfect mattress. The constant gentle motion combined with the muted pastel colors of the endless sunset creates a hypnotic effect. His eyelids grow heavy as he watches Rick trading a sock, apparently from the dimension where clothing evolves faster than the beings who wear it, for what appears to be an entire cloud archipelago. In the distance, cloud creatures begin what seems to be an evening ritual, gathering in concentric circles and releasing harmonized sighs that blend together into something almost musical. A lullaby composed of breath and gentle wind. The very air seems to vibrate with these soft sounds, creating patterns of ripples through the cloudscape that spread outward like stones dropped in water. Those musical sighs were just the beginning. Imagine an entire universe where everything, absolutely everything, communicates through perfectly pitched humming instead of words. Ancient cultures on Earth have used humming for centuries to induce relaxation. But in this dimension, it's evolved into something far more profound and fundamental to existence itself. The familiar green swirl of Rick's portal tears open the fabric of reality, depositing our duo onto what appears to be a crystalline plaza. Unlike the cloudscape's gentle pastels, this world shimmers with transparent structures that catch and refract light in mesmerizing patterns. But what immediately strikes Morty isn't what he sees, it's what he hears. A constant, omnipresent humming fills the air from every direction, varying in pitch and intensity, but somehow never clashing. Rick? What's that noise? Morty asks, his voice sounding jarringly out of place against the melodic background. Rick winces at Morty's spoken words. Lower your voice, Morty. Nobody talks here. You're basically screaming obscenities in a library. He glances around apologetically as several tall, reed-like beings nearby sway away from them, their slender bodies vibrating with what seems like disapproval. The beings stand at least 9 feet tall, with translucent bodies that resemble enormous cattails or reeds. Their bodies are segmented like bamboo, each section capable of vibrating at different frequencies. They have no discernible faces, yet somehow convey emotion through the patterns of their swaying and the tones they emit. Rick clears his throat and then produces a complex series of hums that rise and fall in a pattern Morty couldn't possibly reproduce. The reed beings stop their retreat, their upper segments bending toward Rick with what appears to be interest. One steps forward and responds with a similar but distinct series of tones. "What are you saying to them?" Morty whispers, trying to be quieter but still earning a disapproving glance from Rick. "I'm apologizing for your vocal outburst and explaining that you're from a dimension of crude mouth noises." Rick transitions seamlessly back into humming, this time producing a sound that manages to be both sarcastic and explanatory at once. As Rick continues his hummed conversation, Morty begins to notice something extraordinary. With each exchange of tones, visible waves of color pulse through the air. Soft greens spiral outward from the reed beings when they seem pleased, while sharper oranges ripple when they appear to question something. The humming isn't just audible, it's visible, creating patterns in the very atmosphere that shift and change with each note. "This dimension evolved completely differently than ours, Morty," Rick explains in a hushed tone between hums. "Language developed from musical resonance rather than verbal communication. Their vocal structures can produce perfect harmonic intervals. They literally cannot speak out of tune with each other." Morty watches in fascination as Rick turns back to the beings and produces a complex series of rising and falling tones. The air around him blooms with concentric rings of purple and blue that expand like ripples in a pond. They don't just communicate with sound, they literally shape reality with it, Rick continues. The buildings, the infrastructure, even the weather patterns respond to specific harmonic frequencies. It's basically a society that never learned to argue because dissonance physically hurts them. Morty notices now that what he initially took for static crystal structures are actually in constant, subtle motion, vibrating in response to the ambient humming. Entire buildings seem to pulse with energy, their transparent surfaces catching light and dispersing it in rhythm with the sounds around them. A smaller reed being approaches Morty cautiously, bending slightly as if curious. It produces a simple, questioning hum, a single note held for several seconds. "It's trying to say hello," Rick translates. "Try humming back, just a single note. Don't overthink it." Morty takes a deep breath and produces an uncertain The sound comes out wobbling and unsteady. But to his surprise, a small cloud of pale yellow forms around his head. The reed being responds with what seems like an encouraging tone, this time producing 2 notes in sequence. "It's teaching you basics," Rick says with uncharacteristic patience. "Like talking to a baby. Try copying that." For the next several minutes, Morty practices under the guidance of his reed teacher, gradually producing clearer tones. With each successful attempt, The colors his sounds produce become more defined, shifting from muddy yellows to clearer golds. When he manages a simple three-note sequence, a nearby flower-like growth responds by blooming, its petals unfurling in a spiraling pattern. "I did that," Morty asks, forgetting to whisper in his excitement. The reed beings vibrate with what might be their version of wincing, but his teacher produces a soothing tone that seems to calm the others. Their entire ecosystem responds to sound, Rick explains. Plants grow based on specific frequencies. Weather forms through harmonized community humming sessions. They literally sing their world into the shape they want it. As Morty's lesson continues, Rick engages with several taller reeds in what appears to be a more complex conversation. Their tones create intricate patterns in the air, forming geometric shapes that overlap and transform with each exchange. The sun begins to set, casting long shadows through the crystal structures. As darkness falls, the quality of the humming throughout the dimension begins to shift. The organized, purposeful tones of daily activity transition to something more random and gentle, a nighttime symphony of relaxation. They're winding down, Rick explains. Like most species, they've developed sleep cycles, but they've ritualized the transition. This is basically their society-wide lullaby. Indeed, the reed beings have begun arranging themselves in concentric circles around what appears to be a central plaza. They sway gently, their individual hums blending into a collective sound that rises and falls like gentle waves. The visual manifestations of their tones have shifted to deep blues and purples that pulse outward in slower, more hypnotic rhythms. The cool thing is, Rick continues, his voice dropping to match the quieting environment, their communal evening humming happens at frequencies that are scientifically optimal for inducing relaxation and sleep in most carbon-based life forms. It's basically perfect sound therapy that evolved naturally. Morty finds himself instinctively swaying with the rhythm, his eyelids growing heavy as the harmonized tones wash over him. The colors spiraling through the air seem to blur and soften, creating a visual blanket that complements the auditory one. "Come on," Rick says, guiding Morty toward a small crystal structure that has morphed into what resembles a sleeping chamber. They've prepared a place for us to rest. The acoustics in these sleep pods are specifically designed to enhance the relaxation properties of the nighttime humming. As they settle into their transparent accommodations, the walls of the structure seem to vibrate in sympathetic harmony with the sounds outside, amplifying certain frequencies while dampening others. The effect is immediately noticeable, a physical sensation of relaxation that spreads through Morty's body like warm honey. "Wake up, Morty," Rick whispers, his voice somehow both urgent and peaceful. Not for the day, for something better. Morty's eyes flutter open, his body still humming with the residual vibrations from their previous location. But what greets him now is something entirely different. A vast expanse of iridescent grass stretching to the horizon, each blade shimmering with colors that shouldn't exist in nature. But there's something immediately strange about this place beyond its appearance. Everything is moving with impossible slowness. "What's happening?" Morty asks, his own words seeming to stretch out longer than intended. He watches, fascinated and slightly disturbed, as a nearby blade of grass bends at a glacial pace, taking several seconds just to move a few degrees. "Welcome to the slow-motion meadow, Morty," Rick says, sweeping his arm in a gesture that leaves a trail of afterimages in the air. "Where time flows at approximately 1/10 the rate we're used to. Our perception stays normal, but everything around us..." He pauses to point at a tiny insect suspended in midair, wings caught in the middle of a beat. Gets the extended cut version of reality. Panic flashes across Morty's face as the implications sink in. Are we going to be stuck moving in slow motion forever? I can't spend the rest of my life waiting 10 minutes just to scratch my nose, Rick. "Relax, Morty, we're fine. Our bodies and movements operate at our normal speed. It's everything native to this dimension that's on the slow track." Rick demonstrates by quickly walking a few steps forward, while a nearby flower takes nearly half a minute to complete a single gentle sway. As they venture deeper into the meadow, they encounter the local inhabitants, translucent, jellyfish-like creatures that float just inches above the ground. Their bodies pulse with bioluminescent light that shifts through a rainbow of pastel colors. One approaches them with what appears to be a greeting gesture, its tentacle-like appendages unfurling with such deliberate slowness that Morty finds himself holding his breath, waiting for the movement to complete. "That's how they say hello," Rick explains, watching Morty's fascination grow. At their native temporal rate, that took about 2 seconds. From our perspective, it's more like 20. They experience time differently here. What feels rushed to us feels normal to them. But how do they get anything done? Wouldn't everything take forever? Morty asks, watching as another creature slowly prepares what appears to be a meal, ingredients floating through the air at an almost imperceptible pace. That's the point, Morty. Here, it's not about getting things done. It's about experiencing every moment fully. Rick reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small package. "Here, I'll show you how to adapt." Rick demonstrates making a simple sandwich, narrating each step as ingredients gently float together. What would normally take 2 minutes stretches into nearly an hour. But there's something mesmerizing about watching a dollop of mustard suspended in air, slowly descending toward the bread, catching the light in ways Morty had never noticed before. "This is actually kind of beautiful," Morty admits, watching the completed sandwich hover before him. "It's like seeing all the details you usually miss." Exactly. In our dimension, we're all about efficiency. Get it done quick, move to the next thing. "Here, the journey is the destination," Rick says, gesturing toward the horizon where the sun has begun its glacial descent. The sunset in this world is unlike anything Morty has seen before. What might take 20 minutes back home unfolds over hours, the light transitioning through every imaginable shade of gold, amber, and crimson. The slow shift in color bathes the meadow in warm light that gradually moves through the entire spectrum, revealing details in the landscape that change with each new hue. This is what the progressive relaxation practitioners back home try to achieve, Rick explains, settling into the swaying grass. They tense and release different muscle groups to create awareness of physical sensations. Here, the entire universe does that work for you. Morty finds himself fixated on a single dewdrop sliding down a blade of grass. In normal time, it would be a momentary glint of light, gone before it could be properly appreciated. Here, its journey becomes an epic tale, the droplet catching and reflecting the changing light, revealing intricate patterns within its seemingly simple form. "I was so frustrated at first," Morty says, his voice softer now, matching the pace of the world around them. "But now I don't want it to hurry up. It's like I can actually see everything for once." Rick nods. That's the secret of this place. The jellyfish people call it the revealing pace. When time slows down enough, you start to notice things your brain usually filters out. Your mind stops racing forward to the next thought because there's so much to experience in the present moment. As they lie back in the meadow, Morty notices something unexpected happening. His breathing has naturally synchronized with the gentle swaying of the iridescent grass. Each slow undulation seems to match his inhales and exhales perfectly, creating a visual rhythm that his body instinctively follows. "The grass isn't just pretty here," Rick explains, his own chest rising and falling in the same rhythm. "It's functioning as a visual metronome. Your brain is hardwired to match rhythms it observes. It's why yawning is contagious, why people walk in step together without thinking about it." Morty watches as the jellyfish creatures gather in small groups, their bodies pulsing with synchronized light as the meadow darkens. Are they going to sleep? Not exactly. They're synchronizing their temporal perception. During their equivalent of night, they actually experience time even slower. It helps them disconnect from physical awareness, which is a key step in their rest cycle. The methodical, rhythmic swaying of the grass continues, somehow becoming both more pronounced and more gentle as darkness falls. Morty feels a strange sensation spreading through his limbs. Not quite numbness, but a pleasant heaviness, as if gravity itself has become a comfortable blanket. "What's happening to me?" he asks, voice barely above a whisper. "Your body is responding to the visual cues," Rick says. "You're experiencing what sleep therapists call progressive relaxation. First, your awareness of tension changes, then your muscles start to release that tension. The slow movements here are acting as a tool for your body to follow along, systematically relaxing you from your toes up to your head." As Morty settles deeper into the grass, he notices his thoughts beginning to slow as well. Not in a frightening way, but in the same gentle, methodical manner as the world around him. Each thought feels more complete, less rushed, like his mind has finally been given permission to fully explore one idea before jumping to the next. The gentle slowing of Morty's thoughts is suddenly interrupted when Rick taps his shoulder and points toward a shimmering mirage on the horizon. You think slowing down changed your perception? Wait until you see what happens when logic itself takes a vacation. Before them stands what appears to be an enormous classical library, constructed entirely from luminescent liquid. The massive columns and archways ripple constantly, yet somehow maintain perfect architectural integrity. The structure shouldn't be possible according to any normal physics. It's like someone took the Library of Alexandria and built it from ocean waves frozen in time, except these waves continue moving. Rick, that building is flowing, Morty says, squinting at the impossible sight. How is it doing that? That, Morty, is the upside-down logic library. It's where knowledge doesn't just break the rules, it rewrites them entirely, Rick explains as they approach the massive entrance. Rivulets of what looks like liquid mercury form intricate patterns across the doorway, spelling out words in a language that seems to rearrange itself the longer Morty stares at it. Inside, the space expands far beyond what the exterior suggests is possible. Countless shelves stretch in every direction, holding books that hover slightly above their designated spaces. But what immediately catches Morty's attention is that every single person in the library is reading their books upside down. Why is everyone? Morty begins, but Rick cuts him off. Just watch and learn, Morty. Or in this case, maybe unlearn. Morty picks up a nearby book. The cover features a constantly shifting image that seems to represent different things depending on how long he looks at it. When he opens it to the first page and attempts to read normally, the words literally detach from the paper, sliding off like drops of ink before splashing onto the floor in tiny puddles that scurry away like insects. What the hell? Morty exclaims. A tall, impossibly thin librarian approaches them. The being has at least 7 eyes arranged in a vertical line down what might be called a face, and they blink in perfect sequence from bottom to top, creating a hypnotic rippling effect. What throws Morty even more is when the librarian speaks, the words come out completely backwards. Irarbil 8 ot emoclu, the librarian says. Thanks, we're just browsing, Rick responds casually, as if the backward speech made perfect sense. Rick, how did you understand that? Morty whispers. Close your eyes, Morty. What? Just do it. Reluctantly, Morty closes his eyes, and suddenly the librarian's next statement comes through perfectly clear. The section on temporal paradoxes has been temporarily removed due to causing itself to never have been written. Morty's eyes snap open in shock. I understood that. But how? This dimension operates on inverse logic, Rick explains while flipping through a book that seems to be reading itself aloud in a whisper only he can hear. The harder you try to understand something, the less sense it makes. But if you stop trying to force comprehension and just accept the absurdity, everything becomes weirdly clear. That sounds like complete nonsense, Morty protests. Exactly. And that's why it works perfectly here. Rick gestures toward the surrounding library. Think about sleep for a second, Morty. What happens when you try really hard to fall asleep? I can't fall asleep. Precisely. This place works on the same principle. Rick picks up another book and hands it to Morty. The more you fight against nonsensical rules, the more confused you get. But when you surrender to them, things just start working. The library exists in a perpetual state of dusk, with ambient lighting that never seems to have a clear source. Soft orbs of gentle illumination float around visitors like curious fireflies, providing just enough light to see without being stimulating. The atmosphere feels perfectly calibrated to lull the mind into a relaxed state. Morty tries reading another book, this time turning it upside down like the other patrons. The words stay on the page but rearrange themselves constantly, forming new sentences with each passing second. After several frustrated minutes of trying to follow the shifting text, he groans in exasperation. This is impossible. How is anyone supposed to read anything here? Rick smirks. You're still trying to apply regular logic, Morty. Stop trying so hard. But I need to understand how… No, you don't. That's the whole point. Throughout the library, patrons sit in reading areas that defy conventional design. Some chairs appear to be made from solidified whispers, while others seem to be constructed from the shadows cast by books that don't exist. A few readers float gently above their seats, apparently unaware they're no longer touching anything solid. For nearly an hour, Morty struggles with various books, each attempt more frustrated than the last. Finally, he collapses into one of the floating chairs with a sigh. I give up. This place makes no sense, and I'm tired of trying to figure it out. The moment those words leave his mouth, something extraordinary happens. A nearby book drifts toward him, hovering before his face. When it opens itself, the words remain perfectly still, and Morty suddenly realizes he can understand every single page without even reading it. Simply by touching the cover, the entire contents of the book transfer directly into his mind. "Whoa," he whispers, eyes wide. "Now you're getting it," Rick says with satisfaction. This is the paradoxical intention effect in action. In sleep therapy, they sometimes tell insomniacs to try staying awake, which ironically makes it easier to fall asleep because it removes the pressure and anxiety of forcing yourself to sleep. This whole library operates on that principle. Morty runs his fingers along the spine of another book, instantly absorbing its contents. So the harder I try to make sense of things, the less sense they make, Rick finishes. But when you accept the absurdity, everything becomes clear, Morty completes the thought, a smile spreading across his face as he grasps more books, information flowing effortlessly into his mind. The multi-eyed librarian returns, blinking in that hypnotic sequence, and guides them to a special reading area where several chairs float in gentle, rocking motions reminiscent of cradles. As Rick and Morty settle into these chairs, they discover the seats adjust to create the perfect ergonomic support, encouraging complete relaxation. This is why these strange universes are perfect for falling asleep to, Rick explains quietly, his voice matching the hushed atmosphere of the library. They deliberately subvert logical thinking, the very mental process that keeps our brains alert and active. When we let go of trying to make sense of everything, our analytical thought patterns power down, which is precisely what needs to happen before sleep can take over. The surrealism of the library surroundings, books that read themselves, architecture made of flowing liquid that shouldn't be able to hold its shape, librarians with sequential blinking eyes, creates a dreamlike state that mirrors the transition to sleep. The brain begins to disconnect from the demanding cognitive processes of wakefulness, embracing instead the illogical reality before it. It's like training wheels for your brain, Rick continues as his chair rocks slowly back and forth, teaching it to release the tight grip it keeps on reality during waking hours. Morty nods, understanding flowing into him as easily as the contents of the books he's touched. He watches as nearby patrons drift into peaceful states that blur the line between reading and dreaming. Some have books floating above them, pages turning by themselves, content streaming directly into minds that have stopped trying to process information through conventional means. As Morty's mind drifts between wakefulness and dreams among the floating books, Rick gently nudges him and whispers, "Ready to experience proportion in a whole new way?" Morty blinks, pulling himself back to awareness as Rick guides him through a portal that opens to reveal an enormous forest clearing where impossibly tall trees stretch upward like living skyscrapers. In the center of the clearing, several moss-covered giants sit in a circle, their massive bodies at least 50 feet tall. Their skin has the texture of ancient bark, with patches of soft moss growing across their shoulders and backs. Despite their enormous size, these beings move with surprising delicacy, each deliberate motion flowing with graceful precision as they arrange what appear to be tiny specks of dust on giant leaves spread before them. "Rick," Morty whispers, his voice trembling as he presses himself against a tree root the size of a bus. "They're gonna crush us if they see us. We need to get out of here before—" "Relax, Morty," Rick interrupts, pulling a small device from his lab coat. "These guys are the gentlest beings in the multiverse. They've evolved in a society where the smaller something is, the more significant it becomes. Those aren't dust specks they're arranging. They're T-sets." Before Morty can protest, Rick points the device at both of them and clicks a button. A strange, tingling sensation washes over Morty's body as the world around them seems to expand exponentially. The tree root they were hiding behind now towers like a mountain, and the giants in the clearing have grown from 50 feet tall to what must be hundreds of times that size. "What did you do?" Morty gasps, staring up at the now truly colossal beings. "I shrunk us down to the appropriate scale for the tea party," Rick explains, casually walking toward the circle of giants. "Now we can appreciate the art form properly. These beings have developed incredibly precise motor control despite their size. It's like watching a bulldozer perform microsurgery." As they approach, Morty can now see that what appeared to be specks of dust are actually intricately crafted teacups and saucers, each one carved with designs so detailed they would require a microscope to fully appreciate at their original size. The giant beings notice their approach, and one lowers an enormous hand toward them with such careful control that Morty barely feels the breeze from its movement. "The tea ceremony in this dimension isn't just about drinking tea," Rick explains as they climb onto the offered palm. "It's a form of meditation, a ritual focused entirely on being present in the moment." These giants spend decades perfecting the precise movements needed to handle objects that are, relative to them, smaller than grains of sand would be to us. The giant raises them up to the main gathering where Morty can now see the full tea ceremony setup. Enormous leaves function as tablecloths atop what appears to be a section of tree stump. The teacups, despite being perfectly sized for Rick and Morty now, would have been microscopic to the giants in their natural state. Each cup glows with a soft bioluminescence, emitting gentle pulses of blue and green light. "The tea itself changes color based on the drinker's mood," Rick says, pointing to the cups already filled with the luminescent liquid. "It's not just pretty, it's a form of communication in their culture. The giants can't speak as we do because their vocal vibrations would shatter these delicate cups, so they've developed this visual language instead." Morty watches in fascination as one of the giants uses a tool resembling a single eyelash to stir a droplet of something into a teacup. The movement so controlled, they barely disturb the surface of the liquid. The tea transitions from blue to a peaceful lavender color. These ceremonies promote relaxation and a respite from daily stresses, Rick continues, accepting a tiny teacup from a giant finger that moves with ballet-like precision. The focus required to perform these rituals, the deliberate movements, it all contributes to a meditative experience. As Morty takes his own cup, he's startled to recognize a familiar figure perched on a leaf several feet away. Bird Person sits cross-legged, eyes closed, plucking what appears to be an instrument crafted from a single feather. The gentle sounds that emanate from this simple instrument create a perfect harmonic backdrop to the ceremony. But unlike the stoic, intense Bird Person that Morty knows, this version appears completely serene, his usually rigid posture relaxed as he sways gently with the music. "Is that?" Morty begins. "Yep," Rick nods, sipping his tea, which glows a calm azure. "Bird Person visits different dimensions too, Morty. This one suits his musical talents better than most. The giants value his ability to create sounds delicate enough for their ceremonies." The tea ceremony progresses with each movement of the giants flowing like underwater choreography. They pass tiny plates of what Rick explains are pastries made from pollen grains, each one decorated with intricate patterns visible only at their current miniature scale. The giants move in extreme slow motion, creating a hypnotic rhythm as they perform the ritual that appears to have specific, deliberate steps. When our brains process these unusual size contrasts, it triggers feelings of wonder, Rick whispers as they watch a giant gently lift a teapot the size of a thimble with fingers as large as redwood trees. It's recalibrating our sense of space and proportion. Notice how it makes you feel vulnerable but also fascinated? Morty nods, understanding flowing through him as he observes the ceremony. His tea has shifted from an anxious yellow when he first received it to a more tranquil green. The giant's careful movements, despite their enormous size, create a strange juxtaposition that captures his attention completely. He finds himself focusing on the precision of their actions, the way they handle objects so delicate they make eggshells look sturdy by comparison. As the ceremony continues, the bioluminescent tea creates a gentle light show. Cups glow in various colors: serene blues, content purples, curious greens, creating a synesthetic experience as the visual elements blend with Birdperson's gentle music. The combined effect engages multiple senses without being stimulating, creating a perfect atmosphere for relaxation. The giants have evolved this way because in their culture, the most precious things are the smallest, Rick explains. Their entire society values miniature art above all else. The smaller something is, the more significant it becomes. It's why they treat these microscopic teacups like sacred artifacts. As the sun begins to set behind the massive trees, casting long shadows across the clearing, the giants' movements become even more deliberate. They begin to hum, a sound so deep and resonant that Morty feels it rather than hears it. The vibrations travel through the giant's palm where they sit, through the teacup in his hand, and into his body, creating a gentle rocking sensation. That's their nighttime lullaby, Rick says, his voice growing softer as the humming intensifies. The frequency is perfect for inducing relaxation. The giants don't know it, but the vibrations they create are at exactly the right wavelength to gently rock beings our size. Birdperson's music adapts to complement the humming, his usual stoic demeanor completely transformed in this peaceful setting. His feathers ruffle slightly with each note he plays, creating tiny ripples in the air that seem to make the bioluminescent T-pulse in rhythm. The last gentle notes from Birdperson's instrument linger in Morty's ears as they step through a portal, immediately experiencing a sensation that can only be described as wrong, or rather sideways. What was once a vertical cliff face before them suddenly becomes the ground beneath their feet as gravity yanks them in an entirely unexpected direction. Morty's knees buckle as his brain struggles to process this fundamental shift in orientation. Whoa! What the? Rick, Morty yelps, his arms flailing as he tries to regain his balance. His vestibular system protests violently against this new reality, sending conflicting signals to his brain about which way is up and which way is down. Easy there, Morty, Rick says calmly, already standing comfortably on what appears to be a vertical surface. Your brain just needs a minute to recalibrate. This planet's gravitational field pulls at a 90-degree angle compared to what you're used to. Pretty mind-bending, huh? Morty cautiously stands upright, his legs trembling slightly as he looks around. What should be a horizontal landscape stretches vertically before him, with trees growing straight out from what his brain still insists is a cliff wall. Buildings jut from the surface at what would be impossible angles on Earth, their architecture designed specifically for this sideways gravitational orientation. So wait, they don't fall off? Morty asks, pointing to what looks like a structure hanging precariously from a ledge. Fall off what? There is no off here, Morty, Rick explains, gesturing broadly. That's just your brain trying to apply Earth logic to non-Earth physics. To the locals, that building is sitting perfectly normal on solid ground. Your perception of up and down is completely relative. It's just that most planets choose the same reference point. As if on cue, several creatures come into view, moving with remarkable fluidity across the landscape. They have octopus-like bodies with multiple adhesive limbs that allow them to navigate their environment with graceful, sweeping motions that almost resemble underwater swimming. Kinda reminds me of those astronauts on the space station, Morty observes, watching the creatures glide by. You know, how they float around all weightless and stuff. Not quite the same thing, but there's a connection there, Rick nods. Astronauts deal with zero gravity, which causes all sorts of problems with their vestibular system. That's why they get space sickness and sleep like garbage up there. Without our familiar pull of gravity, the inner ear gets confused, spatial orientation goes haywire, and the normal sleep-wake cycle gets totally disrupted. One of the octopus-like beings approaches them, its translucent limbs rippling as it moves. Unlike the awkward stumbling of Morty, this creature is perfectly adapted to its environment, using subtle shifts in its multiple appendages to maintain perfect balance and control. But these fellas, Rick continues, they evolved in this sideways gravity field. Their entire biology, from their nervous system to their locomotion, is built around this orientation. What looks bizarre to us is just Tuesday for them. The creature extends a limb in what appears to be a greeting gesture. Rick responds with a complex hand movement that seems to satisfy the being, who then continues on its way with elegant, undulating movements. How are you doing that? Morty asks, still clutching at a nearby rock formation for stability. You're walking around like this is totally normal. I've been to plenty of weird gravity worlds, Morty. After a while, your brain learns to adapt quicker. Just stop fighting it. The more you resist, the longer your adjustment period takes. Morty takes a tentative step forward, then another, gradually letting go of the rock. His movements are still stilted and unnatural compared to the locals, but he's no longer in danger of toppling over. Look that way. Rick points toward what Morty's brain still interprets as up relative to their position. Above them, or rather, to their side, clouds hang in what should be a vertical arrangement. Suddenly, they begin to release rain, which falls in a direction that appears horizontal from Morty's Earth-centric perspective. The water creates shimmering curtains that catch the light of this world's sun, refracting it into prismatic patterns that dance across the landscape. That's actually beautiful, Morty admits, watching the sideways rainfall create what looks like suspended crystal from his perspective. It's like the rain is just hanging there. To them, it's falling straight down, just like on Earth, Rick explains. But yeah, the visual effect is pretty spectacular if you're not used to it. They continue walking along the surface, passing by gardens where plants grow perpendicular to what Morty would consider the ground. Homes and buildings that initially looked like they were defying physics now begin to make sense as Morty's brain slowly adapts to this new gravitational orientation. You know what's interesting, Rick says, as they navigate through what appears to be a marketplace. Your brain is actually starting to adjust faster than I expected. Notice how you're walking more smoothly now? Morty realizes Rick is right. His movements have become more natural, less jerky. The initial vertigo and disorientation are fading, replaced by a strange sense of acceptance. Yeah, it's weird, but I'm kind of getting used to it, Morty admits. It's almost soothing. Once I stopped freaking out about it. That's because you're experiencing the same adaptation process that helps people fall asleep, Rick explains. When your brain receives unusual sensory inputs but there's no actual danger, it eventually stops fighting and just accepts the new reality. Same thing happens when you're drifting off. Your brain lets go of its grip on physical awareness. As night begins to fall on this strange world, Rick leads Morty to what appears to be some kind of lodging. Inside, platforms that look like vertical beds from Earth's perspective wait for them. These are going to be beds, but they're like sticking straight out from the wall, Morty protests. Only from your Earth perspective, Rick reminds him. Just lie down and you'll see. Tentatively, Morty positions himself on the platform. The moment he relaxes against it, he feels the gentle but firm pull of gravity holding him securely in place. There's no sensation of being about to fall. No precarious feeling at all. Just the comfortable pressure of his body against a surface, exactly like lying on a normal bed. Whoa! This is actually really comfortable, Morty marvels. It's like the bed is hugging me, but not in a weird way. That's because the sideways gravity creates a different pressure distribution across your body, Rick explains, settling onto his own bed. Your weight gets distributed more evenly without the usual pressure points that build up when gravity pulls you straight down. Outside their window, the rain continues to fall in its mesmerizing sideways pattern, creating a gentle ambient sound, not unlike a white noise machine. The octopus-like locals can be seen moving more slowly now, their motions becoming more languid as they shift into their nighttime routines. You know, in space, astronauts struggle with sleep because their vestibular system never gets a chance to truly rest, Rick says quietly. Without gravity's constant reminders about which way is down, the brain stays partially alert, trying to maintain orientation. That's why their sleep is fragmented, with less deep sleep and more wakefulness through the night. Morty finds his eyelids growing heavy as he watches the hypnotic patterns of the rain. So why is this different? Shouldn't this weird gravity mess with our sleep too? Nah, that's the beauty of it, Rick replies, his voice growing softer. Here, there's still a consistent gravitational pull. It's just in a different direction. Your brain can detect that consistency, which allows it to eventually relax and stop fighting. It's the inconsistency and lack of reference points that causes problems in space. While the sideways gravity creates predictable sensory input that finally lulls Morty to sleep, Rick quietly activates his portal gun. The familiar green swirl envelops them both, and they materialize in what initially appears to be absolutely nothing, a vast, empty white void extending infinitely in all directions with no visible features, boundaries, or points of reference. Rick? Did your portal gun malfunction again? There's nothing here, Morty says, his voice oddly muffled in the perfect whiteness. Nothing here? That's like saying there's no music in a silent concert hall before the orchestra shows up, Rick replies, settling cross-legged onto the featureless white surface beneath them. We're just early for the show. Gotta wait for the colors to wake up. The colors to wake up? Morty repeats, squinting at the emptiness around them. This dimension operates on a different cycle than ours, Rick explains, checking his watch. Here, colors aren't just passive wavelengths of light reflected off objects. They're conscious entities with their own thoughts, personalities, and social structures. We're basically sitting in their bedroom while they're still asleep. Morty paces nervously in the blank space, his footsteps making no sound. So we're just supposed to sit here in this nothing until something happens? Relax, would you? Look, it's starting. Rick points to what appears to be a small dot of pale blue that has appeared about 20 feet away. The dot pulses gently, expanding slightly before contracting again, like a heartbeat. Soon, another appears. This one a soft yellow that seems to drift toward the blue with purpose. As they watch, more colors begin to manifest, first as individual points, then as expanding blobs that move with distinct patterns. A rich purple sweeps in elegant arcs, while a bright orange bounces in short, energetic bursts. The white void gradually fills with dozens, then hundreds of color entities, each with its own apparent personality expressed through movement. Whoa, Morty whispers, as a deep green blob approaches him cautiously, extending a tendril of color that stops just short of touching his shoe. That one's curious about you, Rick notes. Colors in this dimension experience consciousness as pure chromatic expression. No bodies, no organs, no biological limitations, just pure awareness existing as electromagnetic frequencies. Morty watches in fascination as the colors begin to interact with each other. A group of blues and purples swirl together in patterns that somehow convey the impression of an intimate conversation, while nearby, reds and oranges pulse rapidly in what appears to be an energetic debate. The green entity that had approached Morty rejoins a cluster of similar hues that spread out in a contemplative pattern across the floor. How do they communicate? Morty asks, noticing how the various color entities form relationships that seem meaningful despite having no faces or audible language. They don't need language the way we understand it, Rick says. They communicate through variations in hue, intensity, pattern, and proximity. What we're seeing as color interaction is actually a complex exchange of emotional and conceptual information. As Rick speaks, a bold crimson entity approaches, pulsating rapidly. Rick responds by focusing intensely on the color, and Morty notices his grandfather's pupils dilating slightly. The red entity flares brightly before drifting away, seemingly satisfied. You can actually talk to them, Morty asks incredulously. Not talk, think. Their consciousness resonates with mental imagery, especially color-based thoughts, Rick demonstrates by closing his eyes and concentrating. A moment later, a cluster of turquoise entities drift toward him, forming a spiral pattern above his head before dispersing again. Try it, Rick suggests. Just focus intensely on a specific color, any color, and the corresponding entities will pick up on your thought patterns. Morty closes his eyes, concentrating on the mental image of a deep, vibrant purple. When he opens his eyes again, 3 violet entities have approached him, hovering just at eye level. They pulse gently, almost quizzically, waiting for more. Now try thinking about how that color makes you feel, Rick coaches. Morty focuses on purple again, this time associating it with feelings of mystery and wonder. The violet entities respond immediately, stretching into more complex shapes that somehow convey understanding and reciprocal emotion. One entity forms a pattern that reminds Morty of a spiral galaxy, while another creates ripples that emanate outward like waves in a pond. "They're responding to me," Morty exclaims. "This dimension is basically one big synesthetic experience," Rick explains, referencing the neurological phenomenon where stimulation of one sensory pathway leads to automatic experiences in another. What's happening here is similar to how some people on Earth can see sounds or taste colors, except in this dimension, that's just how consciousness developed in the first place. As they continue their interaction with the color entities, Morty notices the overall palette of the dimension gradually shifting. The bright yellows and oranges that had been bouncing energetically throughout the space begin to fade in intensity, while blues and purples become more dominant. "What's happening now?" Morty asks, watching the transformation. "Their version of evening," Rick explains. "The more energetic colors, what we perceive as warmer hues like reds, oranges, and yellows, are active during their equivalent of daytime. As their day cycle progresses, those colors rest while the cooler spectrum takes over. Blues, purples, and deeper greens dominate their night cycle. The shift creates a remarkably calming effect as the entire dimension bathes in increasingly cooler tones. Each color entity now produces a subtle auditory component, a gentle tone that corresponds precisely to its visual frequency. The collective sound forms a harmonic pattern unlike anything Morty has heard before. Not quite music, not quite ambient noise, but something uniquely soothing that seems to resonate directly with his nervous system. Every universe we visited has its own soundscape," Rick says quietly, his voice blending perfectly with the tonal harmonies around them. "This one's special, though. Each color produces a frequency that directly correlates to its visual properties, creating a true synesthetic experience. Your brain processes both the visual and auditory input simultaneously, engaging multiple senses in a non-stimulating way." Morty finds himself relaxing deeply as the color symphony continues around them. The violet entities he communicated with earlier return, joined by several deep blues and teals. They begin to arrange themselves in a dome-like pattern around Rick and Morty, their edges blending together to form a protective canopy. "They're making us a sleep shelter," Rick explains, stretching out on the white surface beneath them. Color entities understand rest states, even though they don't sleep the way we do. They're creating an optimal environment for our biological sleep patterns. The dome pulses with gentle blue-violet hues that gradually dim and brighten in a rhythm that Morty finds himself breathing in sync with. The tonal frequencies shift to lower, more resonant sounds that seem to bypass his ears entirely and vibrate directly in his chest. The dome pulses with soothing blue-violet hues as Rick abruptly stands, his motion disturbing the careful arrangement of color entities surrounding them. "This is nice and all," he says dismissively, "but if you really want to understand ultimate relaxation, we need to visit the Memory Bubble Spa." His portal gun hums to life, creating a swirling green vortex that seems to pull the color entities toward it momentarily before Rick and Morty step through. On the other side, they emerge onto what appears to be a serene hillside, overlooking what Morty initially mistakes for hot springs. Perfectly circular pools dot the landscape, each filled not with water but with floating transparent spheres that shimmer and catch the light. Within each bubble, scenes swirl and shift like living watercolors. "Well, what is this place?" Morty asks, approaching the nearest pool cautiously. Inside the bubbles, he can make out fragments of experiences. Someone climbing a mountain, another floating weightlessly underwater, a third walking through a forest of impossibly tall trees with diamond-like leaves. "Memory Bubble Spa," Rick answers, already moving toward an attendant. "Only place in the multiverse where memories exist outside the body. Physical entities, Morty. Shareable experiences." The attendants move with fluid grace, their willowy forms nearly translucent as they glide between pools. Their skin seems to ripple with subtle luminescence as they guide visitors toward different collections of bubbles. One approaches Rick and Morty, bowing slightly. "Memories are normally private possessions," Rick explains, as they follow the attendant. "Locked in our minds, inaccessible to others. But here, they've figured out how to externalize the electrical and chemical patterns that form memories. Anyone can experience them, every sensation, every emotion, exactly as the original person did." Morty hangs back, eyeing the bubbles warily. I don't know, Rick. Isn't that kind of invasive? Getting inside someone else's head? The attendant makes a gentle chiming sound that somehow conveys reassurance. Rick translates. All memories here are donated voluntarily. People share their most peaceful moments for others to experience. It's considered an act of compassion. They stop at a pool filled with particularly vibrant bubbles. The attendant gestures toward them with elongated fingers that move like underwater plants in a current. See, the spa staff are like memory sommeliers, Rick says. They match visitors with experiences that suit their emotional needs. Guided imagery techniques, but way more advanced. Morty watches as a visitor across the way, a being with multiple limbs and feather-like appendages, slips into a bubble. The moment of contact, the bubble envelops them completely, and their posture immediately relaxes. I've got a lot on my mind, Rick. I don't know if I want someone else's memories in there too. Rick rolls his eyes. That's exactly why you need this. Look, Morty, the spa creates personalized relaxation experiences. It's like therapeutic guided imagery, but without having to use your own imagination. He points to different bubbles as he continues. Some contain tranquil forest scenes, others have you floating in space, all designed to promote specific states of relaxation. The attendant chimes again, this time directing Morty's attention to a smaller pool with softer-hued bubbles. That one's for first-timers, Rick explains. Lower intensity, gentler transitions. Morty tentatively approaches the edge. The attendant selects a bubble and brings it to the surface. Inside, Morty can see fluffy clouds from above, sunlight breaking through in golden rays, with a gentle rain falling below. Go on, Rick encourages. Just touch it. If you don't like it, you can pull away anytime. Morty extends a finger, making contact with the membrane of the bubble. Immediately, the world around him dissolves as the memory envelops him completely. He's suddenly soaring through clouds, feeling their cool moisture against his skin. Below him, rain falls in a soothing pattern, creating a rhythmic soundtrack. The sensation is extraordinary. He can feel the air currents supporting him, smell the fresh precipitation, see the landscape below through breaks in the cloud cover. It's not just visual, it's a full sensory experience, carefully constructed to induce calm. Meanwhile, Rick has already selected his own bubble, one containing the memory of watching 3 suns set simultaneously over an alien ocean. The attendant guides him to a reclining platform where he can fully immerse himself in the experience. Around them, other spa-goers float in their chosen bubbles. One experiences a walk through an ancient forest where the trees hum softly. Another floats among colorful nebulae, surrounded by the birth of stars. Each memory bubble is designed for a specific effect. Some promote deep relaxation, others inspire a meditative state. Still others create the perfect pre-sleep mindset. The shared experiences promote empathy and connection. Rick's voice somehow reaches Morty despite their separate bubbles. Studies in social psychology show that feeling connected to others reduces stress. These memory bubbles let you temporarily step into someone else's most peaceful moment. Morty finds himself surrendering to the flying sensation. His usual anxiety melts away as he glides effortlessly through the air. It feels so real, he murmurs. That's because it is real. To your brain anyway, Rick replies. The bubbles stimulate all sensory pathways identically to how they were encoded in the original memory. Your brain can't tell the difference between experiencing something firsthand and experiencing someone else's perfect memory of it. As Morty floats through his borrowed memory, he notices subtle details that enhance the calming effect. The perfect temperature of the air, the gentle resistance as he moves through the clouds, the rhythmic sound of rainfall that seems to synchronize with his heartbeat. Nothing jarring or stimulating interrupts the tranquility. Everything is designed to ease his mind toward a state of peaceful relaxation. Why don't we just stay here? Morty asks, his voice dreamy and distant. This is perfect. Everything in moderation, Morty, Rick says, though his voice lacks its usual edge. Too much borrowed peace makes your own reality seem harsh by comparison. Besides, the bubbles dissolve after a few hours. Memories aren't meant to last forever. In his triple sunset bubble, Rick floats on his back in an alien ocean with perfect buoyancy, watching three distinct suns, one crimson, one gold, one with a blue-white corona, sink below the horizon in synchronized motion. The water around him glows with bioluminescent organisms that respond to the changing light, creating patterns that shift from energetic swirls to calming waves as darkness approaches. The attendant moves between pools, occasionally adjusting the position of certain bubbles, or guiding new visitors to appropriate experiences. Their movements are purposeful but unhurried, contributing to the spa's atmosphere of tranquility. As time passes, both Rick and Morty's expressions grow increasingly peaceful. Even Rick's perpetually furrowed brow smooths out as the tension leaves his face. The constant alertness that characterizes his usual demeanor gradually fades, replaced by a rare look of contentment. Their peaceful moment dissolves as Rick's eyes slowly open. He gently nudges Morty, who's nearly asleep against the memory bubble's curved surface. "Come on, Morty," he whispers, helping his grandson to his feet. The memory spa was just the warm-up act. There's something you need to experience while your mind is in this receptive state. Rick activates his portal gun, and they step through into a dense forest unlike anything on Earth. Massive ancient trees stretch toward a twilight sky, their trunks covered with patterns that eerily resemble faces. The most striking thing about the forest isn't what Morty sees, but what he hears. A constant, gentle rustling of leaves and branches despite the complete absence of wind. "What exactly am I supposed to be looking at here, Rick?" Morty asks, his voice automatically dropping to match the hushed atmosphere of the forest. "Is this just some kind of weird forest with face trees?" Rick places a finger to his lips. "It's not about what you see, Morty. It's about what you hear." He pauses, watching Morty's confused expression. "You don't hear it yet, do you?" Morty strains his ears but shakes his head. "I don't hear anything special, just leaves rustling." Rick reaches into his lab coat and produces a small, perfectly round purple fruit about the size of a plum. "This is from the lower branches." "Eat it?" "Is it safe?" Morty asks skeptically, turning the fruit in his hands. "Safer than half the stuff you eat at school," Rick responds. "The fruit temporarily adjusts your auditory perception threshold. It's like fine-tuning a radio to pick up frequencies you normally can't detect." Morty hesitantly takes a bite. The fruit tastes like lavender honey with a hint of something he can't quite identify. Something ancient and earthy. As he swallows, a curious sensation spreads from his ears inward, as if someone is gently adjusting the volume on sounds he didn't even know existed. That's when he hears them. Whispers. Countless overlapping whispers so quiet they barely register, yet somehow perfectly clear. Morty's eyes widen as he turns to Rick in amazement. "They're talking," he breathes. "The trees are actually talking," Rick nods, satisfaction evident in his relaxed posture. "Welcome to the Whisper Forest, Morty. The only place in the multiverse where trees don't just communicate through root systems or chemical signals, they actually speak. But their voices exist just below the threshold of conscious perception for most beings." As they walk deeper into the forest, Morty becomes aware of the incredible complexity of the whispers. Sometimes a single tree speaks, its voice dry and creaking like ancient wood. Other times, dozens speak in unison, creating a verbal tapestry of hushed tones that somehow never clash or create discord. "What are they saying?" Morty asks, trying to focus on individual voices in the harmonious murmur. "Everything, Morty. Absolutely everything," Rick explains, his own voice taking on an uncharacteristically reverential quality. "They're telling stories that go back thousands of years. They're observing us right now. They're predicting what will happen tomorrow and 100 years from now." Rick leads Morty to a small clearing where the forest floor is covered in phosphorescent moss that emits a gentle blue-green light. The illumination is perfect, just enough to see without being harsh or stimulating. As they settle on the soft moss, Rick continues his explanation. "These trees experience time differently than we do. For them, past, present, and future aren't separate things. They're all happening simultaneously. That's why their stories seem to jump around from ancient history to predictions about tomorrow. They don't distinguish between memories, current observations, and visions of what's to come." Morty leans back against the trunk of a particularly massive tree, feeling the gentle vibration of its whispers against his spine. "It's like they're using some kind of whisper therapy," he says softly. "That's exactly what it is," Rick agrees. In a way, this entire forest evolved as a natural ASMR environment. The whispers are specifically calibrated to induce relaxation, because that's how the trees prefer visitors to behave: calm, quiet, receptive. As Morty listens more intently, he begins to pick out fragments of stories, tales of ancient civilizations that visited this forest millions of years ago, observations about the patterns of stars changing over millennia, predictions about cosmic events yet to unfold. The whispers blend together in a continuous flow that makes it impossible to focus on any single narrative for long. "The effect is more powerful than any meditation app back on Earth," Rick explains, his voice growing softer. The trees deliberately keep their communications just below the threshold of conscious awareness, what some might call subliminal. It's not that they're hiding anything. It's that their wisdom can only be fully absorbed when your analytical mind steps aside. Morty finds himself growing increasingly relaxed despite his fascination with the whispered stories. His eyelids feel heavy, and he notices Rick's voice has become part of the forest's soundscape, blending perfectly with the hushed tones of the trees. "Each universe we've visited has been quieter than the one before," Rick continues, his words flowing like a gentle stream. "That's by design, Morty. The Whisper Forest represents the culmination of that progression, training your ears to find peace in near silence, in the spaces between sounds." As Morty's consciousness begins to drift, he realizes the trees have shifted their whispers. They're now speaking in patterns rather than words, creating rhythmic sequences that seem to synchronize with his heartbeat and breathing. The effect is profoundly hypnotic, making it nearly impossible to maintain alertness despite his genuine interest in the stories. The trees are creating what sleep specialists call a verbal cocoon. Rick's voice comes from somewhere both close and distant. They're transitioning from informational content to pure rhythmic patterns designed to guide you towards sleep. The phosphorescent moss beneath them seems to pulse in sync with the whispered rhythms, creating a multi-sensory experience that gently pulls Morty toward the edge of sleep. He notices that even Rick, usually hypervigilant and restless, has settled into a state of unusual calm, his breathing deep and regular. "People think silence helps you sleep," Rick murmurs, his voice barely audible now. "But absolute silence can actually be disturbing to the human brain. What really helps is consistent, non-jarring sound at just the right volume, like these whispers." The faces in the bark of the tree Morty leans against seem to shift subtly, features softening into expressions of ancient benevolence. The whispers have become so integrated with his consciousness that he can no longer tell if he's hearing them or thinking them. "The trees are telling us it's okay to rest now," Rick says, his voice now just another whisper among many. "They've been here for thousands of years, and they'll be here when we wake. Nothing needs our attention right now." Leaving the ancient whispers behind, Rick and Morty emerge onto a surface where silence is absolute yet somehow deafening. "You think those trees were old, Morty?" Rick murmurs, pointing upward at the star-filled void. "Some of these stellar beings were exchanging stories when Earth was still cooling, and they've been rearranging themselves just waiting for someone to listen." The planetoid beneath their feet is small and dark, its surface cool to the touch and completely barren. There's no atmosphere, no wind, no sound whatsoever. Rick pulls two strange-looking helmets from his coat pocket, their transparent domes reflecting the countless stars above. "Put this on," Rick instructs, handing one to Morty. "It's not just for breathing. These are stellar communication interfaces." He fits his own helmet over his head with practiced ease. They translate stellar frequency patterns into something our primitive meat brains can comprehend. Morty reluctantly puts on his helmet, his expression skeptical. "So what? We're gonna talk to stars now? Come on, Rick, even for you this is..." He stops mid-sentence, his eyes widening as he hears something. A distant melodic humming that seems to come from everywhere at once. "They're not just burning balls of gas, Morty," Rick explains, his voice softer than usual. "In this dimension, stars developed consciousness about 8 billion years ago. They form vast communities across what we'd call constellations. but they're actually social structures. Families, nations, storytelling circles. Morty gazes upward, his mouth slightly open as the stars above them begin to shift. Not quickly, but with deliberate, purposeful movements. 3 stars that had formed a straight line now curve into an arc, while another cluster brightens, then dims, then brightens again in a rhythmic pattern. They're saying hello, Rick translates, and they're curious about us. Stars don't get many visitors who can actually communicate with them. But they're just moving and changing brightness, Morty says. How is that even a language? Position, brightness, color. It's all part of their communication system, Rick explains. Most species look at constellations and make up stories about them, but in this dimension, the stars are actually telling the stories themselves. Across cultures on Earth, people connected stars into patterns representing heroes, animals, and mythological figures without realizing they were interacting with a cosmic narrative network. As they watch, a bright blue star pulses and shifts position slightly, creating a new alignment with several fainter companions. That one's talking about the formation of its solar system, Rick says. A process that took millions of years from our perspective, but for them, it's like talking about what happened last week. Morty starts to notice subtleties in the movements. Some stars move in pairs or trios, maintaining relationships with each other while repositioning among the broader community. Others change color gradually, shifting from white to blue, to red, then back again in slow, mesmerizing cycles. They experience time differently than we do, Rick continues. What feels like a quick chat for them might span decades or centuries from our perspective. They're basically having a casual conversation right now, but if we recorded it from Earth, astronomers would publish papers about unusual stellar drift patterns over the next 50 years. As Morty watches the slow dance of the stars, his skepticism melts away. The movements create patterns that somehow trigger emotional responses, a formation that brings unexpected comfort, a color shift that evokes curiosity, a synchronized brightening that communicates something that feels like ancient wisdom. This is actually beautiful, Morty admits, his voice quiet. Better than all those fancy meditation apps on your phone, right? Rick says with a knowing smirk. The interplay between darkness and light up there, the contrast between the black emptiness and those distant points of conscious light. It's literally the perfect visual environment for your brain to start producing melatonin. Suddenly, a thin beam of bluish-white light extends from one of the brighter stars, touching down on the surface near them. Then another appears, and another. Gentle columns of colored light connecting the stars to the ground around Rick and Morty. Whoa, what are they doing? Morty asks, instinctively stepping back. Relax, Rick says. It's how they share direct emotional impressions, kind of like their version of a handshake. A beam of soft violet light touches Morty's helmet, and he gasps as a wave of something that feels like peaceful curiosity washes over him. Not words or images, but pure emotional content, the feeling of wondering about something without anxiety or urgency, just genuine interest. They're sharing their emotional states, Rick explains, as a golden beam touches his own helmet. Stars experience emotions differently than biological organisms. No cortisol, no adrenaline, just pure consciousness experiencing itself across vast time frames. More beams appear, creating a circle of gentle light around them. Some are steady, others pulse slowly, all in different colors: amber, turquoise, rose, indigo, each conveying a different emotional tone. They're fascinated by us because we experience reality so differently, Rick says. To them, we're like mayflies. Our entire lives are just moments from their perspective. But they find beauty in that brevity. It's refreshing for beings that measure their conversations in centuries. Rick motions for Morty to sit down on the planetoid's surface. Might as well get comfortable. They're starting to tell us one of their stories, and trust me, it's worth hearing. As they settle onto the ground, the stars above begin a more complex dance. Entire sections of the night sky shift in coordinated movements, creating flowing patterns that somehow convey narrative. It's not just beautiful, it's mesmerizing, hypnotic in its slow, deliberate grace. They're showing us how they formed their communities, Rick whispers. How they learned they weren't alone in the darkness. Morty finds himself entranced by the cosmic ballet above. The stars move in perfect harmony, their light shifting and pulsing in ways that somehow bypass his conscious mind and speak directly to something deeper. His breathing slows, matching the rhythm of the stellar movements. A small cluster of stars begins to shift into what looks surprisingly like a spiral galaxy in miniature, rotating slowly against the black canvas of space. "That's their version of a nursery rhyme," Rick says, his voice growing softer. Stars telling stories to stellar children about how galaxies form. Morty no longer feels the hard surface beneath him. His attention is completely captured by the dance above, his mind drifting with the stars as they continue their ancient movements. The colored beams around them pulse in sync, creating a visual heartbeat that seems to match his own. "You know what makes this different from the show's regular adventures?" Rick murmurs, lying back on the dark surface. "On the show, we're always running from something or fighting something. But the multiverse isn't just danger and chaos. There's this too: beauty, wonder, experiences that don't make good action sequences but make existence worthwhile." The stars above them now form a protective circle, their light pulsing in a synchronized rhythm that creates a strange sense of safety. Each pulse seems to push Morty's eyelids a little lower, the weight of consciousness growing heavier with each beat. The rhythmic pulses of starlight gradually transform into the soft, ambient lighting of a vast, labyrinthine structure. What if everything you've dreamed, every flying fantasy, every teeth-falling-out nightmare, every impossible landscape your sleeping mind constructed, was carefully preserved in a cosmic collection that spans the multiverse? Rick gently nudges Morty awake as they approach what appears to be an impossibly large building shimmering on the horizon. The structure seems to breathe, its walls rippling with gentle undulations like the surface of a calm sea, disturbed by a slight breeze. As they draw closer, Rick explains they've reached their final destination, the Dream Collector's Museum. "This place houses the most comprehensive collection of dreams in existence, Morty," Rick whispers, his voice unusually reverent. "Dreams don't just disappear when you wake up. They're not just neural echoes that fade away. They're experiences that can be preserved." The entrance to the museum opens without anyone touching it, responding to their presence like a conscious entity. The interior space unfolds before them, an architectural marvel that seems both intimate and infinite simultaneously. Dreams float suspended in transparent containers throughout the vast chamber, each emitting its own unique luminescence, casting gentle patterns across the floor and walls. A tall figure glides toward them, moving with the unhurried grace of someone who has all of eternity to complete each motion. The curator's body is draped in flowing garments that seem woven from the same substance as the dreams themselves. Most striking are the multiple sets of heavy-lidded eyes arranged across what approximates a face, each pair blinking in sequence like a cascading wave. "Welcome to our repository," the curator speaks, their voice resonating directly in Rick and Morty's minds rather than traveling through air. "We've been expecting you. Your journey has been interesting to observe." The museum's architectural and curatorial design becomes immediately apparent as they begin their tour. Unlike conventional museums that organize exhibits chronologically or by creator, the dreams here are arranged by emotional resonance. The curator guides them through different wings dedicated to distinct emotional experiences: serenity, wonder, exhilaration, melancholy. "We don't categorize by species or planetary origin," the curator explains, as they pass through an archway that seamlessly transitions from one emotional palette to another. Dreams transcend biological boundaries. A peaceful dream experienced by a seven-tentacled being from dimension X227 resonates with the same fundamental qualities as one from a human child on Earth. The lighting throughout the museum shifts with subtle intentionality, dimming and brightening in patterns that mirror natural sleep cycles. Morty notices the illumination gradually becoming softer as they venture deeper into the galleries, creating an environment that encourages a state of tranquil alertness rather than either full wakefulness or complete relaxation. "The lighting isn't random," Rick explains, noticing Morty's observation. "It's synchronized with typical brainwave patterns during sleep transitions. The deeper we go, the more it mimics delta and theta waves, the frequencies of deep sleep and dreaming." They pass through a chamber where visitors of various species sit in semi-transparent pods, their eyes closed in deep concentration. These contemplation chambers allow visitors to temporarily experience selected dreams through a process resembling meditation. The beings inside remain perfectly still, occasionally smiling or furrowing their brows as they navigate someone else's dreamscape. The experience creates a unique form of metacognitive awareness, the curator explains. Visitors maintain self-referential thinking while simultaneously surrendering to another's dream narrative. It's quite different from ordinary dreaming, where self-awareness typically diminishes. Rick pauses before a particular display, his expression unreadable. "I've contributed to this collection," he admits quietly. "Several dreams, actually." "Which ones?" Morty asks, suddenly intrigued by this rare glimpse into his grandfather's inner world. Rick's mouth twists into a cryptic smile. "That's for me to know and you to never find out. Let's just say not all of them involve scientific breakthroughs or interdimensional conquests." As they continue through the exhibits, Morty begins to notice something familiar about certain displays. A dream of floating cloud kingdoms with fuzzy blue inhabitants. Another featuring beings, communicating entirely through musical harmonies. A sideways gravity world where orientation shifts perpendicular to expectation. The curator notices Morty's growing recognition. "You've been seeing reproductions of our most popular exhibits throughout your journey," they confirm. "Many of the dimensions you've visited are physical manifestations of dreams we've collected. Dreams so powerful and recurring across species that they've developed resonance patterns capable of generating actual pocket dimensions." This revelation strikes Morty with sudden clarity. Their entire journey hasn't been a random tour of strange universes. They've been experiencing physical manifestations of the multiverse's collective dreamscape, a curated sequence of experiences drawn from the museum's collection. "So you're telling me that cloud kingdom with those sighing blue fuzzballs, that was someone's actual dream?" Morty asks, struggling to process this meta-narrative twist. "Not someone's," the curator corrects. "Everyone's. It's a composite dream experience shared across 17 species and 42 dimensions. What you experienced was the physical manifestation of a universal dream archetype. The design of each gallery space creates distinct emotional responses, with color palettes and spatial arrangements carefully chosen to complement the dreams they contain. The sections housing serene dreams feature soft diffused lighting and open pathways that encourage contemplation, while areas containing more intense experiences use strategic architectural elements to prepare visitors emotionally. We've found that visitors often need preparation before encountering certain dream types," the curator explains. "The transition between emotional states requires careful spatial orchestration, much like the hypnagogic state between wakefulness and sleep. As they reach the deepest part of the museum, they enter a circular chamber unlike any other. Here, dreams aren't contained in transparent vessels, but exist as free-floating wisps of luminescent energy, intermingling and creating new patterns. This is where we invite special visitors to contribute," the curator says, gesturing to the swirling dream matter. "Your experiences together have created a unique narrative, a journey through the collective unconscious of the multiverse. Would you consider adding it to our collection?" Rick and Morty exchange glances. With a nod from Rick, Morty approaches a recessed alcove where a comfortable reclining chair awaits. As he settles in, the curator places a gentle hand on his forehead. "Simply close your eyes and remember," the curator instructs. "The memories will transfer naturally when you reach the hypnagogic threshold between wakefulness and sleep." As Morty's eyelids grow heavy, the images of their journey begin to rise from his consciousness. The cloud kingdom, the humming dimension, the slow-motion meadow, the upside-down library, all the way through their cosmic voyage. These memories drift upward, joining the swirling patterns of dream matter above. Rick follows the same process, though what specific memories he contributes remains his own secret. When they both finish, the curator guides them to a special viewing chamber where their combined dream experiences have formed a new exhibit, a shimmering orb containing the essence of their journey. "Your contribution creates a recursive loop," the curator explains. Visitors who experience your dream may find themselves inspired to seek out the dimensions it contains, thus perpetuating the cycle of experience and preservation. The journey comes to its conclusion as Rick and Morty find themselves in what might be the strangest location yet, a chamber where the very walls pulse with dreaming consciousness. It's no coincidence that each universe they've visited has gradually slowed their mental processes, each location more hypnotic than the last. From the physical gravity of clouds to the metaphysical weight of dreams, the progression mirrors how our minds transition from wakefulness to sleep. As Rick's eyes grow heavy, he mumbles something about dreams being the multiverse's greatest invention, his words slurring as consciousness fades. In an infinite cosmos, sleep itself becomes the final frontier, the universal adventure we all share.